Marvel's master of multiversal magic. Hey, fanfic family. So glad to see you here again to continue this incredible adventure. As always, kindly remember, this story is 100% fiction, so don't go looking for dimensional portals in your closet. All rights to this fantastic novel belong to the original author. We're just your humble narrators of epic tales. Are you enjoying the fanfic? Show it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and dropping us a like. And if you're impatient for more exclusive content, our Patreon is your happy place. Chapter 326 Cardcaptor Sakura. Then stop. In Misaka Mikado's mental world, George's spiritual body cleaved through the darkness enveloping her, then awakened her spirit through his mental abilities. Simultaneously, outside, George opened his eyes, using a similarly attributed ability to suppress Misaka Mikado's continued advancement while simultaneously inscribing various sealing techniques on her body to seal her surging energy. Finally, he kicked away the black lightning surrounding her, releasing his control over Kamar-Taj Tuma. Come help. Using his current method, it would probably take at least half an hour to completely suppress Misaka Mikado's advancement and bring her back to normal. However, with the help of Kamar-Taj Tuma's overpowered right hand, it might be done quickly. Without the cunning steel bar's control, Kamar-Taj Tuma quickly rushed to Misaka Mikado and grabbed her shoulder. Under George's powerful suppression, the black lightning did not attack Kamar-Taj Tuma, allowing his right hand's Imagine Breaker ability to activate successfully. In just 5 seconds, the black lightning suits on George and Misaka Mikado disappeared, returning them to normal. I'll leave her to you. I have to go now. He took out 2 sets of clothes from his changing space, one for Misaka Mikado whose school uniform had been destroyed by lightning, and the other for himself. Without waiting for Tuma Kamar-Taj and Junho to ask, he quickly left. His mind was filled with insights into advancing to level 6 and the essence of lightning, and he needed to hurry back to his seclusion to study and absorb them. Although it wasn't as good as he had expected, the advancement of more than 50% was still a great gain. What? Something else? Tuma Kamar-Taj couldn't help but complain as he saw George leave. Every time he met this Misaka sister, she would leave after only a few words. At this moment, Misaka Mikado opened her eyes and murmured, "How strange, I saw a man I didn't recognize who pulled me out of the abyss." What entered Misaka Mikado's mental world was George's mental body, and George's mental body was naturally not Misaka Mikado's appearance, but rather his own physical body in the Marvel main world. Because the soul that had initially split off and taken over the body was still George himself. Returning to his room in the windowless building, George didn't go to Leicester but immediately entered seclusion mode. However, this seclusion didn't last long before he was awakened by a soul-tearing pain. His original body in Marvel had split off its soul once again. His attention shifted to the clone in the new world. This time, the clone was human, and male, a mature male, but unfortunately, a bit too mature, already over 90 years old. But it didn't matter. After taking over the body, the originally aged and lifeless body was immediately improved, gaining the same physique and magic power as all the clones in the other worlds. Although the appearance was unchanged, the essence was completely different. The only problem was that because of his advanced age, his brain had a lot of memories, and digesting these memories took a lot of time. The Lee family of Hong Kong, Clover. Is this the world of Cardcaptor Sakura? After digesting the memories of this body, George fell into reminiscence. He rarely watched anime, but that didn't mean he hadn't seen any. He had watched some of the earlier shonen anime like Saint Seiya and Dragon Ball. And this anime, Cardcaptor Sakura, is actually one of the few anime he's ever watched. Mainly, it was because his deskmate in school loved watching it, and he was introduced to it by her. At the time, he found the magic interesting, and the protagonist, Sakura, was very cute, so he unexpectedly finished watching it. Later, he even watched a similar anime called Magical Girl Lyrical Nanoha. Looking back now, he has to thank that deskmate he once had a crush on. If it weren't for her recommendation, he'd probably be completely clueless now. But speaking of which, although it seems like just a shoujo anime, its world building is actually quite vast. It's practically a multiverse. Because besides Sakura's world, there are many other parallel worlds, like the many different universes in Marvel, only this one isn't as numerous. Moreover, the magic in this world is incredibly powerful. Clover, the creator of the magic cards, can not only manipulate time and space and foresee the future, but can even travel between different worlds. In Academy City, He'd probably be considered a demon god level figure who has grasped the essence of magic. Get out of this coffin first. Slowly opening his eyes, George looked around and gently moved the coffin lid above his head. The old man he was now inhabiting was named Li Zhuan, a direct descendant of the Li family, the strongest Taoist family in China. He had mediocre talent and average magical power, and died peacefully at the age of 98. Today was his 7th day after death. If he didn't come back to life, he would be buried tomorrow. Slowly sitting up from the coffin, he looked around. This was clearly a mourning hall, and many members of the Li family, dressed in mourning clothes, were kneeling below. Kneeling at the very front was Li Yelin, the head of the Li family in this generation, and also Li Xiaolang's mother. Although Li Zhuan had mediocre talent and had cultivated for over 90 years, his magical power was still inferior to Li Xiaolang, the most talented child of the Li family in this generation, but he was older and of higher seniority. By all accounts, he was the most senior elder in the Li family. His younger brother was the grandfather of the head of the family, Li Yelin, and Li Yelin had to call him her great-uncle. If he hadn't been so obsessed with Taoist magic that he never married or had children, the head of the Li family now would probably be his grandson or granddaughter, not Li Yelin. Of course, this was a good thing for George. He didn't want to suddenly have a bunch of blood relatives, especially an extra spouse. The ancestor has risen from the dead. Just then, a teenage member of the Li family inadvertently looked up and saw George sitting up from the coffin, looking around. He immediately screamed in fright. As the scream rang out, all the Li family members keeping vigil were also awakened and looked up at George. When they saw that George had really sat up from the coffin, they immediately jumped up from the ground. Some grabbed compasses, some drew peach wood swords, some drew talismans, and some chanted incantations. Although he was the ancestor of the Li family, if he had risen from the dead, they would first have to exorcise the demon and protect the righteous path. Youngsters, hold your fire. I haven't raised a corpse, George roared, his voice booming with power, causing everyone to freeze in place. Indeed. How could these experts not detect a raised corpse? Besides, zombies don't talk like that. Chapter 327 Holy crap, the ancestor is awesome. Stop. At this moment, Li Yelin, the head of the Li family, also spoke up to stop her clansman. She had just used her magical artifact to detect that her great-uncle indeed had no corpse aura, ghostly aura, or demonic aura. Instead, he exuded a very powerful magical energy fluctuation. Hearing the family head's words, everyone put away their magical artifacts. Seeing this, George jumped out of the coffin, his mind racing to find a reason to explain his resurrection. Fortunately, he quickly found a barely plausible explanation from Li Zhuan's memories. Great-uncle, what exactly happened? Li Yelin stepped forward, asking George with a face full of doubt. Her great-uncle had lived for 98 years. Although he practiced Taoist magic, his cultivation was not high, and he had long since reached the point of exhaustion. For the past 2 years, even getting out of bed had been a problem. He had been bedridden. 7 days ago, he finally breathed his last. She was present at the time and could confirm that her great-uncle had truly passed away. But now, not only had his great-uncle come back to life in the coffin, but his health had also improved significantly after that jump. Although his hair was still white, a closer look revealed a rosy complexion, and wrinkles were barely visible. This was truly strange. Hearing Li Yelin's question, all the clansmen perked up their ears. They too were curious about how their ancestor had suddenly come back to life. The entire Li family, including both direct and collateral branches, numbered over 300, not counting those outside managing the family's modern businesses. Many of them lacked cultivation talent and had married and had children early. Therefore, the generational differences within the clan were sometimes significant, a phenomenon common in many large families. For direct descendants like Li Xiaolang, there were likely many grandchildren among them. 98-year-old Li Zhuan was truly a living ancestor to many family members. Except for Li Yelin, who addressed Li Zhuan as great-uncle, everyone else respectfully called him ancestor. Ahem, to be honest, I didn't expect this either, George sighed. Originally, I thought I was going to die. But as I took my last breath, I couldn't help but reflect on my life, remembering the Taoist arts I'd studied for most of my life, the countless Taoist books I'd read, and suddenly I had an epiphany. At that moment, I felt as if I had merged with nature, and I gained many insights. When I woke up, I was just in the coffin. Could this be Enlightenment. Hearing George's explanation, all the older members of the clan, including Lee Yellen, widened their eyes, their faces filled with disbelief. The younger generation looked at each other, not understanding what enlightenment meant. It turned out that various Taoist books recorded that when cultivation reached a certain level, it was possible to achieve oneness with heaven and man and attain enlightenment of the Great Tao. Those who attained enlightenment would not only greatly improve their magical power, but also significantly extend their lifespan, even living for 300 or 400 years without a problem. However, such things had always been legends. No one had ever truly reached such a state, especially in modern times. Oh, not entirely impossible. According to clan records, the world's strongest mage, Clover, who possessed half of the Lee family's bloodline, seemed to have reached that level, though it was merely a rumor, never officially acknowledged. If it were enlightenment, then the ability to bring the dead back to life would be understandable. However, the fact that the ancestor, with limited aptitude and weak magical power, could achieve enlightenment still felt somewhat unsettling. But upon closer reflection, the level of enlightenment didn't seem to be solely related to magical power. A state of mind seemed crucial. The ancestor had lived for 98 years, could recite all the clan's Taoist scriptures fluently, and had studied all Taoist techniques. He had never married or had children, dedicating his energy to the pursuit of the Tao. With such a level of attainment, enlightenment wasn't entirely impossible. Grandfather, have you truly achieved enlightenment? Lee Yellen couldn't help but swallow hard as she stepped forward to confirm. For a family, this was no small matter. A cultivator capable of enlightenment, even with previously weak strength, would become a top-tier expert in the world. There are even historical legends of ordinary scholars who, despite never having practiced cultivation, achieved enlightenment overnight by thoroughly studying scriptures and thus attained immortality. While somewhat exaggerated, it's not impossible. Becoming an immortal is out of the question, but becoming a high-ranking Taoist master is certain. The Lee family was originally a prominent Taoist family, but it has declined somewhat, especially in its youngest generation. Among the direct descendants, only Li Xiaolang possesses the aptitude for cultivation. Fortunately, Li Xiaolang's aptitude is high enough that, at such a young age, she is already more powerful than most of her clansmen who have reached adulthood. However, Li Xiaolang's growth will take time. If the ancestor achieves enlightenment and her strength greatly increases, then the Li family will have another powerful figure besides her, eliminating concerns about external dangers. Back then, Clover appeared out of nowhere, crushing all mages in the east and west, becoming the undisputed most powerful magician in the world, but also offending many. Consequently, the Lee family also incurred considerable resentment. While Clover was alive, those people naturally dared not do anything, but things are different after her death. Especially some Western magicians, who know that Clover's strength comes from the fusion of Eastern and Western magic, particularly the Taoist arts of the Lee family. Therefore, they have always coveted the Lee family's Taoist arts, wanting to steal them and become the second Clover. Over the years, they have dealt with many magicians who secretly infiltrated the Lee family mansion. It should be. I do feel that my magical power has improved a lot, and I have gained much more understanding of Taoist magic. George nodded, then walked to the courtyard outside the morning hall. He waved his hand and roared towards the sky, "Summon the Thunder Emperor." Rolling thunder, instantly, dark clouds covered the entire Hong Kong, and countless bolts of lightning rolled within them, seemingly about to strike at any moment, looking extremely terrifying. Hiss! Lee Yellen and all the members of the Lee family, seeing George's lightning magic envelop the entire Hong Kong, all gasped, and similar thoughts echoed in their hearts. Holy crap, ancestor's awesome. At this moment, they were completely convinced that their ancestor had definitely attained enlightenment. Otherwise, how could his strength have risen to such a terrifying level? A casual lightning spell was so terrifying. Looks like I fooled him. George glanced at the dumbfounded crowd and waved his hand again to disperse the dark clouds. Although he had inherited Li Zhuan's negligible magical power and all his knowledge of Taoist arts, he couldn't immediately unleash the Taoist arts of this world. He had to slowly convert and absorb them himself. In reality, what he had just unleashed was the ancient magic of the Harry Potter world, Thunderstorm Descent. Chapter 328 The Appearance of the Clow Cards. Previously, when he had progressed more than 50% towards becoming a level 6 absolute ability user, he had a slight feeling of touching the divine realm. Although he ultimately had to step back, That feeling and his understanding of the essence of lightning remained. This greatly enhanced the power of his lightning-based abilities and gave him a very deep understanding of all lightning magic. Ancient lightning magic that previously required several minutes of chanting could now be cast instantly without incantations, and both its power and range were much greater than before. Even the Li family's Taoist techniques from Li Zhuan's memories, he felt that he could easily master them with just 2 or 3 days of study. Any magic or spell related to lightning would be easy for him to learn in the future. Once he grasped the essence, the external manifestations were merely different ways of expression, which he could flexibly adapt. With the ancestors' enlightenment confirmed and his strength greatly increased, and the Li family gaining another top expert, everyone in the clan showed excited expressions. This was a joyous occasion. Thus, the funeral, which had been filled with wreaths and white cloth, quickly transformed into a celebration. However, the patriarch, Li Yelin, did not hold a grand banquet to celebrate, nor did he invite fellow Taoists from all sides. He even deliberately kept the news under wraps, forbidding anyone present from spreading the news about the patriarch's enlightenment. Afterwards, he approached George privately. "Grandfather, there's something I'd like to ask for your help with." "Tell me what it is," George replied. He didn't refuse. As the patriarch of the Li family, he would naturally lend a hand if the family needed anything. Li Yelin was overjoyed upon hearing this. "Grandfather, recently the family's magical artifacts have sensed Cloud's aura. We believe it's the appearance of Cloud's Cloud cards. I want little Sioran to secretly go and capture the Cloud cards, and I hope you can accompany him." The Cloud cards created by Cloud were once the most powerful magical artifacts in the world, encompassing almost all the mysteries of Eastern and Western magic. However, after Cloud's death, they disappeared without a trace and have remained undiscovered to this day. However, just over a month ago, the magical artifacts Cloud had left and the family suddenly sensed the aura of the Cloud cards, located in a small town called Tomoda, near Tokyo, Japan. Cloud is half Li family blood, so the heir of the Li family is qualified to reclaim the Cloud cards. Her son, Li Xiaolang, is a once-in-a-century genius of the Li family. If he could also obtain the blessing of the Cloud cards, he would undoubtedly lead the Li family to glory in the future. However, collecting the Cloud cards requires personal effort to gain their approval. Furthermore, the Li family is already under the spotlight of magicians worldwide because of Cloud. If a renowned family expert suddenly leaves with Li Xiaolang, it will inevitably arouse suspicion. If other magicians knew that Cloud's Cloud cards had reappeared, it would likely cause a bloodbath. Therefore, her original plan was for Li Xiaolang to transfer schools under the pretext of a transfer, accompanied by an elderly butler without magical powers, thus avoiding attention. After all, no one would care what great things a 10-year-old child could do or what important mission he could undertake. However, this meant that everything would depend on Li Xiaolang himself. But things were different now. His great-uncle's enlightenment had greatly increased, and this news was unknown to outsiders. In the eyes of outsiders, his great-uncle was just an old man on his deathbed. Even if he hadn't died this time, he probably wouldn't live for more than a few years. Few people would care about this combination of an old man and a young man. No problem. I also wanted to see the magic cards created by Cloud. Perhaps studying them would benefit my cultivation. George immediately nodded in agreement. He had actually been wondering what time it was and whether the Cloud cards had appeared yet. He had indeed watched the anime, but he wasn't sure of the exact timeline, only that it was around 2000. He also saw Li Xiaolang among the family members, indicating that Li Xiaolang might not have transferred to Japan yet. But now it seemed that Sakura had released the Cloud cards more than a month ago, and Li Yelin was planning to send Li Xiaolang to collect them. He would definitely agree to help Li Xiaolang collect the Cloud cards. Li Zhuan had studied the Li family's Taoist magic for over 90 years. Although his aptitude and magical power were lacking, his theoretical knowledge was vast, making him a veritable encyclopedia of the Li family's Taoist magic. Therefore, he didn't need to stay with the Li family to delve into Taoist magic. He could simply practice slowly according to Li Zhuan's memories. Besides, he himself had a great interest in the Cloud cards. If he could thoroughly study the Cloud cards, he would essentially have a thorough understanding of the magic of this world, and his strength would greatly increase as a result. Especially since the Cloud cards contain time-related magic. Of course, he wouldn't try to possess the Cloud cards. The Cloud cards were specifically left for Sakura by Cloud. If he dared to take them, he would first have to ask for the consent of one of Claride's reincarnations, Ariel. As the reincarnation possessing a portion of Claride's soul, memories, and magical power, and currently the strongest magician in the world, he might not necessarily be a match for him. The key point was that Claride wasn't truly dead, he had gone to another parallel world. If he acted recklessly, he might just come back and beat him to pulp. In fact, even without the two reasons mentioned above, he didn't intend to steal from a child. His purpose was to study the creation method of the Clow cards and the magical principles behind them, not to obtain a powerful magical artifact. That's wonderful. Hearing her great uncle agree so readily, Lee Ellen's face immediately lit up with a smile. As the head of the family, her first consideration was the entire family, and only then could she consider her own family and herself. Sending 10-year-old Lee Xiaolang to a foreign land to collect Clow cards was naturally very difficult and painful for her. But there was no other way, for the future of the family, and to cultivate a qualified next head of the family, she had to do this. Besides, Lee Xiaolang himself insisted on going to collect the Clow cards. And with her enlightened great-uncle protecting him, she could rest assured. "When is the departure date?" George asked one last time. Lee Ellen replied. "Tomorrow morning, you and Lee Xiaolang will fly directly to Tokyo. We have some people on the outskirts who will meet you and then take you to Tomoda town. The villa has already been bought and furnished, and Lee Xiaolang's transfer procedures have also been completed. Originally, the plan was to send her son Lee Xiaolang away in the afternoon after her great-uncle's funeral tomorrow. Now that her great-uncle is still alive, they will leave early in the morning, which will also make things more discreet." Chapter 329 Moving into Tomoda town. The next morning, George and Lee Xiaolang boarded a plane to Tokyo. On the plane, Lee Xiaolang looked at George beside him and said firmly, "Don't worry, ancestor, this time I will definitely collect all the Clow cards on behalf of our Lee family. I won't bring shame to the family." "Very good, very motivated, but don't worry too much. It's best if you collect them all, but it's okay if you don't. Xiaolang, you are the most talented child in our Lee family in recent years. Even without the Clow cards, you can become the most powerful mage in the future and lead the family to glory." George patted Lee Xiaolang's shoulder, his face not showing much concern. The Clow cards belonged to Sakura. This was something Claride had already decided, and no matter how hard Xiaolang tried, it was useless. But it didn't matter. Anyway, after Xiaolang married Sakura, Sakura would be the Lee family's daughter-in-law, the future head of the family, and the Clow cards would naturally belong to the Lee family. This was actually better. Not only did he get the Clow cards, but he also gained Sakura, who inherited Claride's magic power, a win-win situation. Therefore, George didn't care whether Xiaolang collected the Clow cards or not, winning over his little wife was the priority. Since his identity in this world was the patriarch of the Lee family, he naturally had to consider the Lee family's interests and hoped for its growth and prosperity. But Mother said that this time in Tokyo, we must find a way to get all the Clow cards. A hint of hesitation appeared in Lee Xiaolang's eyes, then he said firmly, "Patriarch, I know you're just comforting me. Even if it's difficult, I won't give up." George smiled. "Some things, just do your best." He didn't say anything more. Right now, Lee Xiaolang's mind was still full of collecting Clow cards. After meeting Sakura, he would change his mind without George saying anything. So he didn't need to worry too much about these things, he could just let things take their course. Before that, he needed to first integrate and learn all the Lee family's Taoist techniques from Li Zhuan's memories. The Clow cards in Claride utilize a lot of knowledge from Eastern magic systems. To thoroughly analyze the magical principles of all the Clow cards, he could start with the Lee family's Taoist techniques. Once he fully comprehends the Lee family's Taoist magic, he will naturally be able to understand the Clow cards. Otherwise, even if he obtains the Clow cards, he won't know how to proceed. Would he transform them into beautiful women and then examine their bodies? 4 hours later, the plane landed in Tokyo. As soon as they exited the airport, the head of the Lee family's company there picked them up and took them to a car. The Lee family is secretly the #1 Taoist family in China, but publicly they are a sizable multinational corporation with branches all over the world. In fact, almost all major Taoist and magical families have their own family businesses on the surface, specifically serving them, and the heads are often members of the family who lack cultivation aptitude. For these families, making money is incredibly easy. Any member with decent cultivation can easily amass a fortune by using their magic to help out. Not to mention these large families, even individual magicians are never short of money if they want it. Wizards are different from superpowered individuals in the Marvel Universe. Most superpowered individuals only have one ability, and if it's not something that can make money, they're generally no different from ordinary people except for committing crimes. But wizards are different. Wizards have complete training systems, learn all sorts of spells, and can easily make money. Just take the most basic divination, fortune-telling, wealth prediction, and feng shui as an example. If used well, these are enough. Don't be fooled by the fact that wizards in the Harry Potter world are all poor. That's because of international secrecy laws that prevent them from interfering in Muggle society to acquire wealth in any way. Otherwise, even the weakest wizard could thrive in the Muggle world. Even the simplest restoration spell, which a first-year wizard can master, can be used to become a junk collector, easily achieving a small goal. An hour later, George and Li Xiaolang arrived in Tomoda Town. Although Tomoda Town is a town, because it's close to the capital Tokyo, its actual area is quite large, and it's well developed in all aspects, even having its own aquarium. It's early June now, just entering summer, and the weather isn't too hot yet. Ancestor, this is your residence in this town. All the furniture and appliances have been replaced with the latest models. Li Qingshan, the company head in Tokyo, parked the car in front of a villa, gave George and Little Wolf a brief tour, introduced the general situation of the town, and finally said, the school Little Wolf is transferring to is called Yazi Elementary School. I have completed the formalities. You can take him there tomorrow, Ancestor. Okay, I understand. Thank you for your hard work, Qingshan. George nodded gently. Li Qingshan immediately said respectfully, Ancestor, you are too kind. At your age, you must take good care of your health. Contact me immediately if you have any problems. As a member of a collateral branch, he was determined to have no cultivation aptitude at birth, so he always studied hard and managed the family business after growing up. He stayed in Tokyo for many years and was unaware of what had happened in the family recently. He only knew that the kind-hearted ancestor who had been in the family since childhood had passed away. He was somewhat saddened at the time, but he never expected that he would come back to life and accompany Little Wolf here. But he thought that even if his ancestor were alive again, he would be 90 years old, and he should still take better care of his health. However, after saying that, he felt something was off. He looked closely at his ancestor, tall and upright, with a ruddy, wrinkle-free face, thick white hair, and hands that carried dozens of kilograms of luggage without trembling or straining. Then he looked at himself, a large beer belly, balding hair, and being out of breath after just one walk around the villa. He suddenly realized that he was the one who should be taking better care of his health. Qingshan, you should also pay attention to exercising more while doing business outside. Although you don't have the aptitude for cultivation, you can still practice the family's martial arts, at least it will strengthen your body. George smiled and pointed to the top of Li Qingshan's head. Hair growth. Li Qingshan's sparse hair immediately became thick and full. Qingshan understands. Thank you, Ancestor. Ancestor is amazing. You even know this kind of magic. Li Xiaolang, standing to the side, was also quite wide-eyed upon seeing this. He had never seen such a long-haired magic in the family's Taoist books. After Li Qingshan left, George led Li Xiaolang to officially move into the villa. That night, Li Xiaolang, unable to wait any longer, changed into a Taoist robe, picked up the special compass that Clover had left for the Li family, chanted an incantation, and began his search for the Clow cards. The Jade Emperor has decreed, the divine inkstone is in all four directions, metal, wood, water, fire, earth, thunder, wind, lightning. I issue this decree, lightly grind the thunderbolts and lightning, so be it. Chapter 330 Abusing your wife may be fun for a moment, but chasing her back will be a deathly ordeal. Ancestor, there really is the aura of the Clow cards here. The compass senses it. Li Xiaolang's face lit up with excitement as he looked at the arrows faintly appearing on the compass under the influence of the incantation. Although he was somewhat mature for his age, he was still a child after all, and he was naturally very happy to have found the legendary Clow cards, especially in front of his ancestor. Then let's go take a look, George said after thinking for a moment. His appearance had definitely changed the original plot. For example, they seemed to have arrived here half a day earlier than in the original story. So, to ensure that nothing went wrong, he felt it was best to go with Li Xiaolang at the beginning. It would be troublesome if he ended up fighting with Sakura over the Clow cards. Besides, he was indeed very curious about the Clow cards. The two left the villa and jumped along the surrounding rooftops, running in the direction the compass was pointing. In addition to Taoist magic, the Lee family also had specialized martial arts training, so they were not fragile mages. Therefore, they could jump and move forward on the rooftops like martial arts masters without the aid of any Taoist magic. If Li Qingshan hadn't neglected his practice during the day, he wouldn't have been so overweight. It's in that art museum. The old man and the young man arrived at a relatively tall building in the town center. Following the compass's directions, Li Xiaolan quickly confirmed the approximate location of the Clow cards. George, upon hearing art museum, recalled his past life's memories and realized that the Clow card that appeared this time was the one called Silence. This was an interesting Clow card. It not only silenced those around it, but also forcibly moved those who made noise to a distance, possessing a dual effect. Rumor had it that Clowery invented this card because he disliked Caro's constant chatter. In fact, the word magic he learned in Fairy Tale also had a silencing spell. However, word magic had a drawback. The effect appeared in the form of words, and the effect disappeared once the formed words were destroyed. The Harry Potter magic system also had spells that could silence people, but these only applied to individuals. In terms of effect, none were as wide-ranging or effective as the silence card. Little Wolf, to capture the Clow cards, you must rely on your own strength. Otherwise, the Clow cards won't submit, and you won't be able to use them. So I can't help you much, Grandpa, I know. Mother has already told me. You'll watch from the side in a moment. I will capture the Clow cards with my own abilities. Li Xiaolan drew his magic sword, took out a stack of talismans, and his face was full of confidence. Just then, a pink RV slowly stopped near the entrance of the art museum. Then, two little girls got out of the RV and sneaked into the art museum. One of the little girls was wearing a phantom thief bodysuit with devil wings, carrying a bird-headed staff, and a small yellow doll was perched on her shoulder. The other little girl was wearing a pink dress and was holding a small camera, constantly filming the first girl. Sakura, Karo, and Tomoyo. George guessed the identities of the two girls and the beast at a glance, but he didn't say it aloud. Li Xiaolan frowned. Who are they? And why do I sense the aura of Clow cards on that guy, manipulating the compass again? He noticed the needle deflecting, sometimes pointing towards the art gallery's exhibition room, sometimes towards the girl with the bird-headed staff below. Putting away the compass, Li Xiaolan leaped down, landing directly in front of Sakura and Tomoyo, blocking the path. George, seeing this, also landed beside them. Sakura and Tomoyo were startled to see Li Xiaolan and George, dressed in Taoist robes and wielding magic swords, descend from the sky. Li Xiaolan of the Li family, who are you? Why do you have Clow cards? The Li family, are you some distant relative of Clow cards? Karo spread its wings and flew off Sakura's shoulder. What are you, you strange-looking thing? Seeing the doll on Sakura's shoulder suddenly move and talk, Xiaolan immediately and warily held his magic sword horizontally in front of him, ready to cast a spell at any moment. Hearing Xiaolan's words, Xiaoke immediately roared angrily, you annoying brat. What do you mean by strange-looking guy? I'm Ouroboros, the sealed sacred beast symbolizing the sun. What? You're the so-called strongest guardian beast Ouroboros with a golden eye. Xiaolan sheathed his magic sword, pointed at Xiaoke, and looked utterly disillusioned. How could you just be a doll? His words clearly hit Xiaoke's sore spot. Xiaoke opened his mouth and bit Xiaolan's finger, and Xiaolan shook it off after a while. I only lost the magic power of earth and fire, which is why I'm in this form now. Once Sakura collects the earth and fire cards, I'll regain my power. Don't underestimate me, you brat. She's collecting Clow cards? You must be mistaken. She's just an ordinary person. Li Xiaolan looked Sakura up and down. How long have you been collecting Clow cards? How many have you collected? Almost 2 months. I found 8 in total, Sakura said somewhat hesitantly. Xiaoran frowned. Only 8 cards in 2 months? It seems you're not very capable. Hand over all the Clow cards you've collected. From today onwards, I'll take over the collection. Clowerate has half of my Li family's bloodline, so naturally I'll collect his cards. Karo. Sakura looked at Karo helplessly. She felt Xiaoran's words made sense, but after 2 months together, she couldn't bear to part with Karo, nor with the Clow cards she had collected one by one and inscribed with her name. Karo flew directly onto Sakura's shoulder, pointed at Siren, put his hands on his hips, and loudly proclaimed, "Sakura is the magician I chose," and she broke the seal on the Clow cards. Even if she's not mature enough now, she'll definitely be able to collect all the Clow cards in the future. I don't need you, little brat, to decide, then let's have a contest. Whoever wins will be qualified to collect and inherit the Clow cards. Siren affixed a talisman to his magic sword and assumed an attack stance. Sakura, holding her bird-headed staff, looked completely bewildered. Why was a fight about to break out? She didn't know how to fight. Just then, George reached out and placed a hand on Siren's shoulder, finally speaking up. "Siren, who challenges a girl to a duel on the first meeting? We can put aside the question of who collects the Clow cards for now. There's still one Clow card we haven't dealt with. Let's subdue that one first." He pointed to the silence card in the exhibition hall. He felt that if he didn't intervene and stop things from escalating, a fight would break out. And he'd be in for a world of hurting his wife later. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 331 Seal released. "Who are you?" Just then, a shout came from not far away. It turned out that the patrolling guards had heard the commotion and rushed over. "Oh no, we've been delayed for too long, it's time for our patrol." Tomoyo covered her mouth slightly, while Sakura looked panicked. "What should we do? If we get caught, it'll be a disaster if Dad and my brother find out." She had sneaked out through the window that night and even ran into Yukito when she climbed down the tree. Confuse them. George flashed and appeared in front of the patrolling guard, casting a confused charm that left him stunned and disoriented. He could now cast all the magic from the Harry Potter world without a wand, though the effects weren't as good. However, since he had become a dragon slayer mage and possessed dragon-like characteristics, essentially a humanoid magical creature, the effects of casting spells without a wand wouldn't be much worse. In fact, he no longer needed to worry about not having a wand in the new world. Because by simply plucking a single hair from his own head and using the dragon's power to condense a magically imbued wooden stick, he could create a very effective wand. However, he felt it wasn't really necessary. Against relatively weak enemies, his current level of skill was more than sufficient for his wandless spellcasting. When facing truly formidable foes, he would still choose more powerful and destructive magic from other worlds, superpowers, or even simply transform into a dragon to solve the problem. Alright, don't worry about these people. You two, see how to capture the Clow card first. Grandpa, leave it to me. Siren charged ahead, heading towards the art gallery. Sakura, don't lose to that brat, Karo shouted, grabbing Sakura and Tomoyo and rushing towards the gallery. However, less than a minute later, they were teleported out by the silence card for making noise. A child wearing a hat was also present. It turned out the silence card was attached to a famous painting in the art gallery, a painting originally created by a father for his child before his death. The child wearing the hat was that child. She wanted to drive away the silence card and restore the painting to its original state. Let's try again, this time we'll try not to make a sound. Sakura and Tomoyo, along with Karo and the child, tiptoed back into the exhibition hall. Siren wasn't to be outdone, and he followed with a graceful step. George stood outside, watching with a smile. You see, when children work together on something, their initially strained relationship quickly improves. After 3 consecutive failures, the 4 humans and 1 beast had to stop and start discussing. The key issue now was that even if they approached the silence card without making a sound, they couldn't subdue it, because casting a spell required chanting, which would produce sound, and sound would send it away. Come on, it's still early, no rush, let's eat something first and then think about it. To improve the relationship between the children, George waved his hand and conjured a blanket on the ground, then waved again and conjured various snacks and desserts. According to the Gump transformation law, food cannot be created out of thin air, even those family magic spells that create delicious food require basic ingredients. With George's current skill level, he could already manipulate air to create all sorts of things he wanted, including various kinds of food. However, once this food was ingested, it would quickly revert back to air. The advantage was that he could indeed taste delicious food without gaining weight from overeating. The disadvantage was that it was useless when he truly needed food to stave off hunger. No matter how much delicious food he ate, he would still starve. Of course, if he really wanted to be full, there were other ways. He could use the magic he had recently learned from the elves of Middle-earth to cultivate fruit and grow some to eat. Wow, cheesecake, teriyaki, tricolor dumplings, cream pudding. Seeing the food scattered on the ground, Kirabarus flapped its wings and swooped over, then grabbed a piece of cake and started eating. That bread is annoying, but you're a good person, old man. Thank you, Grandpa. Sakura, Tomoyo, and the child in the hat, seeing George conjure blankets and food out of thin air, first showed expressions of amazement, then politely bowed to George before sitting down. Little Wolf looked puzzled. Ancestor, does our Lee family still possess such magic? These are minor arts, you'll learn them after you achieve enlightenment, George casually explained. Little Wolf immediately declared with great ambition, so enlightenment is this powerful. I want to achieve enlightenment too. In the morning hall, he had witnessed his ancestor summoning thunderclouds across the sky, and during the day, he saw his ancestor regrow people's hair and make the kitchen utensils automatically prepare various delicacies. Just now, he conjured blankets and food out of thin air, acting like a legendary deity. He had been influenced by Taoist arts since childhood and knew very well that the Lee family's Taoist arts mainly focused on subduing demons and monsters, but they couldn't do these things. Now he understood that it was because his ancestor had achieved enlightenment that he possessed such abilities. Little Wolf, why do you call Grandpa ancestor? What does ancestor mean? Sakura asked curiously. Although Little Wolf still harbored hostility towards Sakura, the ordinary little girl chosen by the sealed beast, he still raised his head and explained. My great-grandfather is my mother's grandfather's older brother. He's 98 years old this year. Don't call him Grandpa, or he'll be a generation older than me. 98 years old. Sakura and Tomoyo were startled by Sioran's answer. They had never seen such an old man before, and the old man's body didn't look like that of a 98-year-old. The speed at which he rushed towards the patrolman was almost invisible to the naked eye. No need, everyone is their own. Although I am Sioran's great-grandfather, you can just call me Grandpa. George smiled and waved his hand. The word great-grandfather was fine within the family, but it would be too strange to use it outside. Sioran, you can call me Grandpa outside too, that will be more normal. Great-grandfather, that's not a good idea. What if Mother finds out? A look of hesitation appeared on Sioran's face. If he called him that, wouldn't he be of the same generation as his mother? Oh my, I've got an idea how to capture those claw cards inside. Just then, Sakura seemed to suddenly remember something. She immediately stood up, took down the bird-headed staff that had transformed back into a key, and began chanting, key containing dark power, reveal your true strength. By the contract, Sakura commands you to release the seal. Chapter 332 The Book of Time. A strange magic circle, blending Eastern formations and Western magic, appeared beneath Sakura's feet, and her bird-head key rapidly enlarged, transforming into a bird-headed staff. She then pulled a claw card from her pocket and gently touched it with the staff. Shadow, the ceiling glass reflects her shadows. Shadow, the claw card immediately transformed into a shadow, attaching itself to Sakura's shadow. Sakura then went outside the exhibition hall and had Tomoyo shine a flashlight on her, imprinting her shadow next to the portrait possessed by the Shizuka card inside. Using the power of the shadow card as a medium, she touched the portrait with the shadow of the staff. Restore your original form, claw card. A miraculous thing happened. The Shizuka card was indeed bound by the power of the shadow staff, transforming into a claw card that flew out of the portrait and landed in Sakura's hand. Shadow magic, interesting. George, having witnessed the entire process, became increasingly interested in the claw cards. With his current level of magic, he could clearly sense that these claw cards were not as simple as they appeared. The silence cards are more than just silencing magic, and the shadow cards are more than just shadow controlling magic. They seem to be a spiritual manifestation of Clower's understanding of the essence of each type of magic. Their current apparent weakness is because the claw cards use Clower's magic power, and since Clower has been gone for a long time, each card retains very little magic power. If Clower himself were to use these cards, the silence cards might silence the entire world, and the shadow cards might control all the shadows that exist in the world. If he could perfectly analyze and understand the magical essence within the claw cards, he could probably not only quickly master all similar spells, just as he did with understanding the essence of lightning, but he could also create his own magic cards. Hey kid, how about it? Our Sakura is pretty amazing. Karo, hands on her hips, approached Sioran. Sioran snorted arrogantly, just lucky, how about this? Since Sakura is the chosen successor of the Sealing Guardian Beast, she naturally has the right to collect the Clow cards. Sakura and Sioran, you two will each use your own abilities to capture the Clow cards. In the end, whoever has the most Clow cards will be the new master. You can learn from each other, get along well, friendship first, competition second. George reached out and placed his hands on Sakura and Sioran's heads, then suggested with a smile. Karo immediately agreed on Sakura's behalf. Okay, that's it. Our Sakura won't lose to this kid, come on, I'll definitely win. Sioran also raised his head, not to be outdone. Sakura, however, helplessly covered her forehead. She didn't want to compete with a seemingly dangerous Sioran. Tomoyo, seeing this, smiled and covered her mouth, then filmed the scene. Thank you for your help, goodbye. The little girl in the hat bowed deeply to everyone after seeing her father's drawing restored to its original state, then turned and left the art museum. It's getting late, we should go too. Remember to get along well with Xiaolang at school tomorrow. George reached out and grabbed Li Xiaolang, apparition. The two vanished instantly. That old man has such powerful magic. The Li family actually has such a powerful figure. Xiao Kei thought to herself as she watched George and Li Xiaolang leave. Although it hadn't regained its power yet, as a sealed sacred beast, its perception was quite good, and it could sense the terrifying magic power within George. Fortunately, the Li family elder didn't seem to harbor any hostility towards them. What does Grandpa mean by saying we should get along well at school tomorrow? Sakura looked at Tomoyo, who smiled and shook her head. On the other side, Li Xiaolang, seeing himself instantly back in the villa, asked George with a look of surprise, Ancestor, is this something I can do after achieving enlightenment? Of course, you'll understand when you achieve enlightenment. It's getting late, go to sleep. George waved Li Xiaolang away, then returned to his room, used magic to modify his magic, and began studying the Li family's Taoist arts. In this world, Taoist arts and magic are essentially the same thing, only expressed differently. It was the same in Academy City. The magic books there also contained Eastern Taoist texts, such as the Baopuzi. The Li family's Taoist arts encompass many things, the most fundamental being the 5 elements Taoist arts of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, as well as extended elements like lightning and ice, with effects similar to various elemental magics. Only the methods of casting and the forms of expression are different. He himself is proficient in lightning, wood, and fire magic, especially lightning, which has touched upon the essence of magic, so these 3 Taoist arts are easier for him to learn. Besides the 5 elements Taoist techniques, the Li family also collected Taoist techniques from other major sects, though these were all auxiliary and less powerful than the 5 elements techniques. For example, there were Miaoshan sect spells for controlling zombies, methods for creating various talismans, tracking techniques, and so on. What surprised him most was that the Li family also possessed Taoist books on time-related techniques, but because they were too profound, no Li family disciple had ever learned them in hundreds of years. On the contrary, Claude, who is not of the same surname, had borrowed and mastered their secrets. He was currently researching time magic and had already made a basic understanding. Once he thoroughly studied the Li family's related Taoist books, he could try to analyze the time card and the Clow cards, thus mastering time magic. At that time, the fairy ball would probably be no problem, and he could save the old guild master and the others. Early the next morning, George, carrying the relevant materials, took Li Xiaolang to Tomoda Elementary School in town. Tomoda Elementary School and Tomoda Middle School were located side by side, encompassing elementary, middle, and high school. Children in this small town could attend school from elementary to high school within the town. Good morning, Sakura. Just as George arrived at the school gate, he encountered Sakura, dressed in her school uniform, skating towards him from the other end of the street. Good morning, Grandpa Li. Seeing George standing at the school gate, Sakura stopped skating and politely greeted him. Then, looking at Li Xiaolang, who was wearing the same uniform, she said with a surprised expression, so this is what getting along well yesterday meant. She then extended her hand to Xiaolang. Hello, Li Xiaolang, let me formally introduce myself. My name is Kanemato Sakura. Li Xiaolang, looking at Sakura's bright smile, Li Xiaolang suddenly paused, then subconsciously extended his hand. Only after shaking hers did he realize his mistake and quickly withdrew it. I won't give you the Clow cards, You two look so good together. George looked down at the two little ones, a fatherly smile on his face. He suddenly understood the look Professor Snape had given him and Hermione at Hogwarts. Chapter 333 The Thunder Card appears. After helping Li Xiaolang complete the enrollment procedures, George said to Li Xiaolang's new homeroom teacher, Mr. Tadayuki Ayuki, I'm entrusting Xiaolang to you. You're too kind, sir. Tadayuki Ayuki quickly bowed. The old man opposite him was over 90 years old, a true elder. George nodded, then said a few words to Xiaolang before leaving the school and teleporting back to his villa. Being old has its advantages, at least anyone with a modicum of politeness would bow to him first. Around 2 p.m., George, who was studying Taoist magic, was suddenly awakened by thunder outside the window. It's going to rain, but no, this doesn't seem like normal thunder. Walking to the window, he could clearly sense a very active magical force at work in the clouds above the town. Could it be the thunder card? He immediately had a clue. If it's the thunder card, I can get my hands on it first. The other cloud cards, since he hadn't finished studying the Li family's Taoist magic yet, would be slow to study even if he got them, so he could put them aside for now. But the thunder card was an exception. Because he had already grasped the essence of lightning, the Li family's lightning techniques were not difficult for him to learn. He could master them completely in just a few days. This gave him the qualifications to study the lightning cards. If the lightning cards truly contain this world's interpretation of the essence of lightning, then understanding them would undoubtedly give him a deeper grasp of the essence of lightning. Improving his mastery of the essence of lightning would not only enhance the power of all his lightning techniques but also accelerate his progress from a level 5 ability user to a level 6 ability user. School's out already, perfect. Just then, he saw Li Xiaolang, carrying his school bag, arriving at the villa's entrance. Elementary school students here get out of school early. Usually, if there aren't any activities, they're out by 2 p.m. In a flash, he was beside Li Xiaolang. Ancestor, Li Xiaolang was startled to see George suddenly appear beside him. The thunderclouds in the sky are strange. It might be a cloud card. Let's go check it out. George picked up Li Xiaolang, spread his wings, and quickly flew towards the most magically active area within the thunderclouds. Cloud cards. Upon hearing the appearance of cloud cards, Xiaolang immediately perked up. He even forgot about asking his ancestor why he could fly. He figured it was because his ancestor had attained enlightenment. But it shouldn't be flying through the clouds. Why did he have wings? But that didn't matter. He'd collect the cloud card first. It's the thunder card. Reaching the clouds and seeing the thunder beast releasing lightning, Li Xiaolang immediately recognized it as the thunder card, representing thunder. The thunder beast, upon discovering George and Li Xiaolang, became extremely agitated, unleashing a bolt of lightning. It seems that without Cloud's blessing, the cloud cards aren't very powerful. Facing the incoming lightning, George showed no fear, as he could sense its intensity, not even as strong as the lightning he currently unleashed with his psychic powers. Cloud cards are magic cards that embody the essence of magic in this world, but to unleash their power, they must first be infused with sufficient magical energy. It's like having a high-tech energy gun that can shatter an entire planet with a single shot. But to unleash its power, you need to know how much energy you pour into it. If you pour in too little energy, it can only blast small stones. If you pour in enough energy, it can shatter an entire planet. The cloud cards are currently using only a tiny bit of magic power left behind by Cloud after his death, so naturally, they can't unleash much power. He thought this might be Cloud's plan. Less magic power meant less power for the cloud cards, allowing Sakura to subdue them. Too much would be too much for Sakura to handle. Moreover, the cloud cards themselves have the function of absorbing and adjusting the excessive magic power within Sakura's body. If too much magic power remains, they won't absorb it from her. They're here too, but just then, George noticed something else. He saw Sakura and Tomoyo passing by the park directly below them, hearing the thunder in the sky, thinking it was going to rain, and taking shelter under the penguin slide. His eyes lit up, and he changed his mind. Instead of directly swatting away the lightning bolts from the thunder beast, he dodged them by shifting his body left and right. Little wolf, I'll hold it off. You think about how to capture this cloud card. George sped down to the park below, put Little Wolf down, and then flew back into the sky, continuing to play hide-and-seek with the thunder beast. Little Wolf, what are you doing here? Below, Sakura and Tomoyo, who had noticed Little Wolf's presence, emerged from under the penguin slide. "You're here too? Didn't you notice the weather's weird today? It's the Clow card's doing." Little Wolf took out a jade bead, transforming it into a magic sword, and pointed it at the thunder beast chasing after the ancestor in the sky. "It really is a Clow card." Upon hearing this, Sakura immediately took out her birdhead key. "Key containing dark power, reveal your true strength." According to the contract, Sakura commands you to release the seal. The birdhead key transformed into a birdhead staff, just like last night. "Do you have a flying card among the Clow cards you've captured?" Sioran asked Sakura, frowning. The ancestor and the thunder beast were high in the clouds, but he couldn't fly and couldn't help them. Although reluctant, he could only ask Sakura, because he remembered there was a Clow card that allowed flight. "Yes, the second one I captured was the flying card." Sakura nodded quickly, reaching for the flying card. "Tomoyo, wait for me down here." After greeting Tomoyo, she gently tapped the flying card with her bird-headed staff, which immediately sprouted a pair of large, white wings. "Quick, get on." "Okay, thanks." Sioran looked at Sakura riding on the staff, his face slightly flushed, and then he climbed on as well. However, he didn't put his arm around Sakura's waist, but instead gripped the staff with one hand to stabilize himself. "What a pity, I didn't bring a camera to film this, nor did I prepare suitable clothes." Tomoyo's face showed regret as she saw Sakura riding her staff and flying into the sky with Sioran. "They're here after all." George in the sky saw Sioran and Sakura flying up on their bird-headed staffs. He stopped dodging the lightning bolts from the thunder beast and instead waved his hand to deflect the incoming lightning bolts. The direction of the deflections was exactly where Sakura and Sioran were, but he calculated it precisely so that they wouldn't actually hit them. It was mainly just to scare them. Chapter 334. This is all the help the ancestor can give you. Seeing the lightning strike, Sakura screamed in fright and began dodging left and right with her bird-headed staff. However, she clearly lacked flying experience, and several dodges caused the staff to become unstable, almost causing her to foul off. Fortunately, Li Xiaolang, who had practiced martial arts for many years, reacted quickly, releasing his sword and grabbing Sakura's waist. He then gripped the staff tightly with his other hand, stabilizing it again. "Xiaolang, this is all the old man can do for you." Seeing this, George smiled with satisfaction, then unleashed a burst of electricity far larger than that of the thunder beast, grabbing the thunder god by the back of the neck. Seal. He used a sealing technique, forcibly sealing the thunder beast's energy, restoring it to normal Clow card. With his abilities, sealing these Clow cards, which were almost depleted of magic power, was naturally not difficult. He didn't do that because he knew these Clow cards were specially left for Sakura by Clow Reed, and his purpose was only for research, not to possess them. This intervention was an exception. He wouldn't interfere with the collection of the Clow cards anymore, he'd at most observe from the sidelines, borrowing them to study when he needed, once Sakura and Sioran had collected them. "Grandpa, are you alright?" Sioran, still holding Sakura, manipulated his bird-headed staff, finally flying to George's side. George smiled at Sakura and Sioran. "Of course I'm alright, are you alright?" We're fine." Sioran then realized he was still holding Sakura, immediately letting go and lowering his head, his face turning red. Sakura, needless to say, was even more flushed, her face as red as a monkey's bottom. The children in this world are really precocious. George knew his goal had been achieved and sighed inwardly. Actually, if the children in this world weren't so precocious, his actions would have been largely pointless. After all, he remembered that when he was 10, he was still playing in the mud, spending his days playing marbles and collecting the 108 heroes from instant noodles with his friends, completely uninterested in girls. But in this world, Sakura already harbored feelings for her brother's best friend, Yukito, and Tomoyo's maturity was comparable to that of an average adult. Her classmate, Sasaki Rika, secretly loved their homeroom teacher, Teradayashi Ayuki. Ironically, this couple actually got together in the end. It truly lived up to the saying, "While you're at work, your future wife is still in elementary school." Re-landing on the ground, George took out the thunder card he had sealed and said, "Regarding the sealing of the Clow cards, it should have been a competition between the two of you, but this was an accident. After some time, I will release this card again, and then you can each rely on your own abilities to capture it again. That's fairer, don't you think?" Sakura and Sioran, their faces still flushed, nodded simultaneously. After explaining, George, with a thunder card and Lee Sioran, apparated back to the villa, and Sioran finally breathed a sigh of relief. Little wolf, you won't blame your ancestor for not giving you this Clow card directly, will you, ancestor? I know you want me to earn the Clow card's recognition through my own abilities. Otherwise, even if I get the Clow cards, I won't be able to use them well, let alone become a qualified mage. I will rely on my own abilities to collect the Clow cards and become their true master, Lee Sioran replied resolutely. George nodded, good, ambitious, but actually, I'm thinking of forgetting. Go to your homework. Capturing the Clow cards is important, but you can't neglect your studies. He originally wanted to tell Lee Sioran his thoughts, but then thought it inappropriate. If you really told a child this age, he might rebel and refuse to do it. It's better to let things take their course. However, he still needed to discuss this matter with the head of the family and Lee Sioran's mother. After sending Lee Sioran to do his homework, he returned to his room and made a long-distance call to Lee Yellen, explaining the general situation. I didn't expect the sealed beast to choose its successor to the Clow cards first. This is going to be difficult. Lee Yellen's voice was filled with worry after learning about the situation. The sealed beast didn't recognize Lee Sioran, only its chosen successor. Even if Lee Sioran eventually acquired more Clow cards, he might not be able to perfectly inherit them. If the Clow cards then self-sealed, everything would be in vain. Yellen, you need to broaden your perspective. I have some different ideas. George then shared his thoughts. I've seen Sakura too. She's pretty, her mother died young, and her father is a university professor. Being chosen by the sealed beasts means she has excellent character and high cultivation potential. Crucially, I think Sioran and she have a strong connection and get along well. In my opinion, if the sealed beasts insist on choosing their own successor in the end, then Sioran should give Sakura the Clow cards as a dowry. When they grow up, we can marry Sakura into the Lee family. That way, our Lee family will get both the Clow cards and a top-tier mage. Ancestor, your idea is brilliant. There was a 2-minute silence on the other end of the phone, followed by Lee Yellen's amazed voice. The ancestor truly lived up to his name, coming up with such a win-win solution. It's a pity I can't leave Hong Kong, otherwise I would definitely go and see what my future daughter-in-law looks like. It's alright, wait until winter break. I'll find an opportunity to bring them to Hong Kong so you can meet them, George replied with a smile. He remembered that Sakura had indeed gone to the Lee family in Hong Kong during winter break this year, where she collected a Clow card and met a female mage who had been harmed by Clow's wickedness. After hanging up the phone, George prepared Sioran's dinner in advance using family magic and then began to study the Lee family's lightning magic and lightning cards in seclusion. For the next period of time, he hardly left the villa. During this time, Sakura captured a sword card that, once used, would make her a top-level swordsman and capable of cutting through any object. There was also a flower card that could create various beautiful flowers and had a gentle personality, a curly-haired lady who loved to dance. And a shield that could block all attacks and possessed incredibly powerful defensive capabilities. George himself also gained a lot from his research on lightning cards, until one day, while he was experimenting with lightning magic in the room he was modifying, suddenly the entire town rang out bells. Afterward, he clearly felt that time in the entire world began to rewind, a process somewhat like using a time converter, but different. And this time rewinded by a full 24 hours. Chapter 335 The Necronomicon. What a terrifying card, George couldn't help but exclaim as he felt time rewind 24 hours. Of all the Clow cards, the time card was the one he cared about most. With other cards, you could resist if you had the strength, or even escape if you couldn't win. But the time card directly stopped your time. If you didn't study time magic, you could only passively take the hits without any power to fight back. I probably can't study it now. I'll think about it later. Ignoring the effects of the time card, he continued to study the thunder card. During this time, he had completely mastered all the lightning techniques of the Lee family and could further analyze the thunder card. As for the time card, Sakura and Sioran would capture it, and if nothing went wrong, this would be the first Clow card that Sioran captured. If he really wanted to study it, he could just take it from Sioran. Sure enough, after time rewound for 3 consecutive days, Sioran and Sakura sealed the time card together. Because Sioran contributed the most this time, the Clow card automatically fell into Sioran's hands. While his clone in this world diligently researched the Thunder card, in the Mage Apprentice world, George's panda clone had already picked up the nesting doll that sealed Morgana's soul. Currently, his magic level had long surpassed level 1000, exceeding Merlin and Morgana of this world, making him the most powerful mage in history. He had already grasped the essence of lightning, greatly increasing the power of his lightning magic, which could perfectly counter the mages of this world. Morgana was no longer a threat to him. Furthermore, having completely mastered all of Merlin and Morgana's magic, he could easily separate Morgana's soul from Veronica's body. Therefore, he decided to release Morgana today and find the secrets of the resurrection spell and the Necronomicon within her mind. Apparition: while David was on a date with his girlfriend and Balthazar was drinking at a bar, George picked up the nesting doll and instantly teleported to a deserted island in the ocean. His target was the Necronomicon, and it was best not to let Balthazar and David know, to avoid unnecessary trouble. Unseal: George placed the sealed Matryoshka doll in the center of the drawn magic circle, then slapped it with his chubby bare paw. The unsealing circle activated, and the doll's lid slowly opened, releasing a powerful surge of black magic. A moment later, a beautiful woman in a long dress materialized. "Finally, I'm finally free from this damned seal," the woman exclaimed excitedly, then looked at George with a puzzled expression. "Who are you? Where is Hogwarts?" She had expected Hogwarts to unseal her, but instead, it was a bear, a giant panda from China at that. "Hogwarts, he's still sealed." George looked Morgana, who had taken over Veronica's body, up and down and laughed. This guy's magic was indeed strong, but compared to him now, it was still considerably weaker. "Useless thing, sealed again. But I never expected my Morgana sex successor in the mortal world to be a panda." Morgana also looked George up and down, but quickly became indifferent. "A panda it is then. Since you've unsealed me, you've done a great service. When I rule the world, you'll be the most honored panda in the world, enjoying the worship of all." She turned her head to look around, then frowned. Why wasn't the resurrection spell array prepared beforehand? "Oh well. You are a panda after all, it's already quite good that you were unsealed. I'll prepare the array myself when we get to the human city. You're quite a nice person, but unfortunately, I didn't unseal you so you could unify the world." The lightning on George's body, exceeding level 5 power, suddenly erupted, instantly surging towards Veronica, who was possessed by Morgana. Morgana, who hadn't expected the panda to ambush her, hadn't even had time to react before being enveloped by the powerful lightning, her entire body instantly stiffening. Electricity is what mages in this world fear most, because it disrupts the flow of magic in the body, preventing mages from casting spells smoothly. For someone of Morgana's level, ordinary electric current is naturally not a problem, but the lightning erupting from George's body was simply too strong. Even Morgana couldn't escape it for a while. "Leech." George met Morgana's eyes, placed his hand on her brow, and unleashed both leech and psychic abilities, forcibly searching the depths of Morgana's soul. It took him a full 10 minutes to find the Necronomicon, revealing the complete contents of the resurrection spell that could revive the dead and create an army of the undead. The resurrection spell didn't actually bring the dead back to life, it was closer to necromancy, simply pulling the soul of the deceased back into the mortal realm, turning them into a spirit under the caster's control. The spirit's abilities weren't significantly different from their life. Of course, it depended on the situation. For a mage, the resurrected magical abilities wouldn't differ much. For a warrior, it depended on their physical condition. If hundreds of years had passed, the body would be nothing but bones, resulting in a much weaker resurrection. If they had only recently died, there wouldn't be much change. Morgana's goal is to resurrect the world's top mages, such as the pharaohs of Egypt and the ancient sorcerers of China, ultimately controlling the necromancer army to defeat all of humanity and establish her own kingdom. Come out. Having obtained all the knowledge of the Necronomicon, George forcefully pulled Morgana's soul from Veronica's body with his bare paw. "Damn it, you traitor!" Morgana's soul roared in fury, her magic power erupting as demonic fire forcefully pushed away the electric current, escaping the suppression of George's billion-volt surge. Then, she waved her hands, sending powerful demonic fire towards George. "Traitor, I never said I was one of your people." George opened his mouth, engulfing the surging demonic fire, and spat out, "Dragon Slayer magic." Roar of the fire dragon, red, blue, and black flames returned to Morgana, causing her soul to sizzle and scream. His flames contained the curses of the dragon's demonic fire and the fiery flames, which were equally harmful to the soul. I won't let you get away with this. Morgana realized that George was no ordinary person, so she didn't stay to fight him head-on. Instead, she turned and flew off the island. As far as she was concerned, as long as she left this place, she could find a body to possess and resurrect at any time. It wouldn't be too late to seek revenge on this panda then. There was no need to confront him directly when she was in poor condition. Chapter 336 Demon-Slaying Thunder Technique. Trying to leave? Did you ask me first? Seeing this, George clapped his paws together and chanted an incantation towards Morgana's soul, which had turned into a wisp of black smoke and was trying to escape. Summon the Thunder Emperor. By the power of the law, a deafening roar echoed through the sky, and a bolt of lightning as thick as a bucket struck Morgana's soul. A piercing scream rang out as Morgana's soul was instantly blasted away. The demon-slaying thunder technique is indeed remarkably effective against souls. George watched Morgana's soul vanish, inwardly praising it. The thunder technique he had just used was the thunder technique from the Lee family's Taoist arts, also known as the demon-slaying thunder technique. After studying and organizing it for some time, he discovered that although the lightning magic he had learned was all of the lightning attribute, it differed in function. Just as flames are classified as normal flames, dragon fire, demonic fire, and vengeful fire, so too is lightning. The ancient magic he learned in the Harry Potter world, lightning descent, is normal lightning, no different from the lightning that occurs during ordinary thunderstorms. Such lightning possesses immense power against ordinary people and creatures, covering an extremely wide area, enough to cover an entire modern city. With further refinement of his lightning magic, it might even be able to cover an entire planet. However, this lightning is less effective against specific targets. For example, its effectiveness is greatly reduced against enemies with strong individual defenses, modern facilities with scientific lightning protection methods, and mountain-like structures. His superpower-derived electromagnetic cannon, lightning giant, and plasma electromagnetic cannon combined with magic are more effective against single targets, with greater destructive power. Even mountains can be easily pierced and cut through, lightning rods can be vaporized. However, both of these are less effective against soul-type enemies. It's not that they have no effect, but they are better than ordinary magic, though much less effective against a kind of lightning magic he learned from the Lee family, similar to the Five Thunder Orthodox method. The Lee family's lightning magic has a small attack range, usually only able to strike with one bolt at a time, and it has virtually no destructive power against buildings. However, it possesses a special anti-magic effect, especially effective against ghosts, spirits, corpses, and enemies with dark attributes. Morgana, as one of the world's top magicians, is still quite powerful even as only a soul. If it weren't for the lightning targeting her, and the fact that it was anti-magic lightning magic, she wouldn't have been so easily annihilated with a single blow. Back then, Veronica used her own body as a vessel, allowing Balthazar to seal her away. It can only be said that the closer one gets to the essence of a certain attribute, the more one realizes how long one still has to go. Lightning magic alone has so many branches, not to mention mastering the true essence of magic, the essence of power. What's going on? And who are you? At this moment, a shocked voice interrupted George's thoughts. Turning around, he saw Veronica, who had returned to normal, looking at him cautiously. For Veronica, being sealed away for so many years, only to awaken to see a giant panda battling Morgana, and the panda actually killing Morgana, was a truly shocking experience. Don't worry, my name is George, a friend of Balthazar. George grabbed Veronica and apparated to David's secret base. You may have many questions, but don't worry, Balthazar will be back soon, and you can ask him then. As for me, tell him I've found a way to turn back into human and I'm going on a journey. See you again sometime. Without paying any more attention to Veronica, George vanished. He had already mastered almost all the magic in this world, now he just needed to find a place to focus on studying the obscure knowledge in the Necronomicon. His true form was a mutant reincarnated into the Marvel Universe, while the others were clones that had split off from his soul and possessed him. The clone's main task is to collect everything in the current world that can make him stronger. Once that's done, he can focus on researching magic. It's like playing several games simultaneously. Once you've reached the end of one game and achieved all the achievements, there's no need to spend too much energy on it anymore, you can just leave it running. There's no need to control the panda body to explore the world and relax. The world of magic apprentices is no different from a normal modern world. If he wants to relax, His Marvel main body can travel the world and see the same scenery, it's no different. Besides, now isn't the time to relax. The Panda clone's future task is to research necromancy. Once successful, it will serve as a spare brain to assist in researching important magic in other worlds. If there's any other use, it's that if he can break through the barriers between worlds someday, the Panda clone can go to other worlds, or rather, to the main world to help, essentially having an identical clone. This is different from the thought body. While the thought body's clone can also disguise itself as a physical entity, it's primarily an energy body and takes away half of the main body's strength. If one day he could not only summon his clones across worlds to appear before him, but also merge all his clones into one, his strength would likely skyrocket. Meanwhile, Balthazar, as usual, left the bar, driving his magic car modified with mimicry magic, and returned to David's secret base. For 1,000 years, he had longed for his wife, Veronica, every single day. Seeing David finally confirm his relationship with Becky, the girl he secretly loved, filled him with both relief and sadness as her master. This made him miss his wife even more, so he had to go to the bar to drink and numb himself. Fortunately, after 1,000 years, he had finally found Merlin's reincarnation. With just a dozen more years of training, he believed David could definitely help him rescue Veronica and kill Morgana. For the next 10 years, he wouldn't have to worry about Morgana's people causing trouble again. All the Morgana magicians had been sealed away in another nesting doll by him and George. Holding the half-empty bottle of wine, he pushed open the door to the secret base, his face breaking into disbelief. Veronica, Balthazar. Veronica rushed excitedly towards Balthazar upon seeing him. The long-lost lovers, separated for millennia, were overjoyed at their reunion. After learning that George had released the seal and defeated Morgana, Balthazar, filled with boundless gratitude, carried Veronica to his room. The details that followed are best left unsaid. Chapter 337 Journey to the Grey Elf Kingdom. In Middle-earth, behind the Elven City, a newly built castle stood tall. This castle, built under George's guidance and through cooperation between humans and elves, was a new school modeled after Hogwarts Castle. George was the headmaster of the school. Inside the headmaster's office, Prince Finrod sighed to his human friend George. Unfortunately, Tinge still refuses to send troops, nor does he want the Grey Elves to come here for guidance and exchange. Most of the plans had gone smoothly. Humans scattered across the land, under the call of wrath and bear a share of brick, had largely settled in the Elven City. The central defensive line against Angbin had been rebuilt. The Firebird and Broadbeam Dwarf clans of Blue Mountains had also sent representatives, intending to collaborate with the elves to create magical equipment capable of withstanding demonic fire. This way, humans, elves, and dwarves would no longer be passively attacked when facing the Balrog army and the possible reappearance of the dragons. Unfortunately, the Grey Elves, who currently occupy the largest number of elves on the entire continent and also possess a powerful Manyr, the branch of their great-uncle Tingle, refused all cooperation. The reason was simple: they still harbored resentment over the killing of the Sea Elves and could not forgive the kidnapping of their daughter Lothine by one of the 7 sons of Fëanor. They would not help the older elves attack Morgoth or help the 7 sons of Fëanor reclaim the Silmarils. If the mountain won't come to me, then I'll go to the mountain. Hearing Prince Finrod's sigh, George thought for a moment and said, "Finrod, I want to visit Tingle in the Grey Elf Kingdom." During this time, he hadn't been idle. He had been exchanging magical knowledge with the older elves and had gained a deeper understanding of their magical system. Because most older elves were apprenticed to blacksmiths and the earth god Auril, they weren't as proficient in magic as the Vanya elves. They were more adept at infusing magical power into the items they forged, creating magical artifacts. The Noldor's strength stemmed largely from the power contained within their bodies under the illumination of the 2 trees. The dwarves created by Ollie were also skilled in forging, their craftsmanship no less than, and perhaps even better than, that of the elves. However, they couldn't integrate various forms of magic into their equipment as easily as the Noldor elves. George had recently been studying alchemy, and the elven enchanting and forging techniques were very helpful to him, but he still wanted to delve deeper into the world's magic. 3 people from the Grey Elf Kingdom would be very helpful in his research and understanding of this world's magic. One was Galadriel, the future elf queen, who possessed Vanya blood and had studied Vanya magic in Valinor. The second was Lothine, hailed as the most beautiful elf. Her sleep magic could even put Morgoth to deep sleep. The last, and most important, was the only deity he could contact now that he couldn't go to Valinor, the Mahur Marion. She had used her power to create a ring of otherworldly Marion around the kingdom, protecting the entire Grey Elf kingdom from Morgoth's invasion. Her divine power was second only to the ordinary valor. George, are you really planning to visit Tingle? Hearing George's words, Prince Finrod paused, taken aback. In his view, even his two younger brothers, who had visited Tingle together and brought along their sister Galadriel who lived there, hadn't been able to persuade him, so George's visit would be pointless. George smiled. Actually, I don't think the two reasons you just mentioned are the main ones that Tingle refused. Oh, elaborate. Finrod immediately showed interest. George explained, you see, we only invited Tingle to help defend and drive away the Balrog army that had already entered and was rampaging in Beleriand. We didn't say we were going to counterattack Angband or reclaim the Silmarils for Fëanor. Besides, Fëanor's 7 princes are already scattered and fleeing in all directions in the east, so you mean... A hint of understanding gradually appeared on Finrod's face. George continued, the Grey Elf Kingdom has existed for nearly 4,000 years. For these 4,000 years, under the protection of Miriam, the Grey Elves have lived a peaceful and stable life. Asking them to help fight a Balrog army now will inevitably result in casualties, something King Tinge of the Grey Elves does not want to see. And even if the Balrog army is driven back to Angband, what benefit will it bring to the Grey Elves? As for coming to the elven city of Dorsonian to exchange magic, it's even more unnecessary. Tinge has never seen my magic and believes that the magic used by us humans, who have only recently appeared, cannot be very powerful and would not be of any help to them, the Grey Elves, so naturally he is unwilling to come. Elves are intelligent beings, and intelligent beings have emotions and desires. They are driven by self-interest and avoid harm. Even the Valimaya are like this. As the king of the Grey Elves, Tinge would certainly prioritize the safety of his Grey Elf people, so it is perfectly normal for him not to agree to fight Morgoth. However, it was precisely because the Grey Elves remained aloof and relied too heavily on Miriam's belt that Morgoth grew stronger, leading to the near annihilation of the Grey Elf race. Miriam's willingness to protect the Grey Elves was entirely due to her husband and daughter. Later, when Tingle was killed by the dwarves because of the necklace inlaid with the Silmarils, and her daughter died and transformed into a human, Miriam was heartbroken and returned to Valinor, leaving the Grey Elf Kingdom without protection. The Grey Elf Kingdom, the largest in terms of elf population on the entire continent, was brutally wiped out by the Blue Mountain Dwarves' army due to years of peace. Had it not been for the arrival of the nearly 70-year-old human baron, they would have been completely wiped out. But later, they were still slaughtered by the brothers Mazlis, driven mad by the Silmaril oath, leaving only a few survivors. If Tingle had intervened to help Morgoth during his counterattack and protected the defenses, although many Grey Elves would have been lost, the Grey Elves would have been tempered by war and wouldn't have been so easily conquered by the dwarves later. So you're going to show Tingle your magic? Prince Finrod finally understood. George nodded, good. Letting Tinge understand the power of human magic will naturally entice him. Then I'll have a good talk with him. Even if he ultimately refuses to send troops to help, he should at least be willing to send someone to the Elven City to exchange magical ideas. Alright. I'll inform my sister now and have him meet you at the edge of the forest in Dorias to bring you into the Grey Elf Kingdom, Crown Prince Finrod decided. The Grey Elf Kingdom forbids outsiders from entering, but Tinge is the great uncle, so bringing a few people in isn't a big problem. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 338 The Arrogant Galadriel. While the eldest prince sent a messenger to his sister in the Grey Elf Kingdom, George began his daily routine in this world. His routine consisted of two main things. First, exchanging knowledge with the elven teachers at the academy who taught magic and blacksmithing, integrating it into his own alchemical system. Second, instructing the elves and humans studying magic at the academy. He didn't teach many spells, meditation, which could concentrate magic power, increase magic level, and even grant immortality like elves, from the world of mage apprentices, light magic, which dealt extra damage to Morgoth's army, and giant magic, which enhanced the melee abilities of humans and elves. These three were carefully selected. Meditation was essential. Elves were born with magic power, but humans weren't. Humans needed meditation to concentrate magic power to cast spells. Moreover, tests showed that not all humans had the aptitude to learn magic. Compared to the elves' beauty, infinite lifespan, innate magic power, archery skills, and immense strength, humans sometimes felt like a freebie. However, humans also have their advantages. They are highly prolific. Elves have only produced a handful of offspring over thousands of years, while humans have gone through dozens of dynasties in the same time frame. Even the few groups that migrated westward and reunited have multiplied their numbers 100-fold. Furthermore, humans learn incredibly quickly. Due to their short lifespans, humans with the aptitude for magic can master the spells they are taught much faster than elves. It's not that elves aren't intelligent, they are, but their learning curve is incredibly slow. A human, after learning a spell, will practice it day and night, devoting almost all their energy to it. For elves, time is meaningless. This means they don't have the concept of expedited learning when acquiring new spells. They might learn it and then only remember to practice it days later, spending their days singing and dancing. Even urging them is futile, it's simply their nature. On the human side, some exceptionally gifted individuals, like Barashir's son Baron, at only 10 years old, have already mastered meditation and their first light spell in just a few months. It's safe to say that he truly deserves his reputation as a human hero celebrated in Middle-earth for so many years. His talent is indeed extraordinary. Speaking of which, in the original story, Baron and Lothine were a couple. After the Battle of Sidenfire, the central defenses fell completely. Only Barathel and a dozen or so humans refused to leave their homeland and continue their guerrilla warfare, but they were eventually found and killed by Morgoth's army. Barathel's son, Baron, was the only human survivor. Seeking revenge, he assassinated many orcs in Middle-earth, gaining great fame and a hefty bounty on his head from Morgoth. Forced to flee Dorshonian, he inadvertently stumbled upon the kingdom of the Grey Elves, met Lothine, and fell in love at first sight. Lothine, who had never seen a human before, was also very curious. After learning about Baron's experiences, she gradually developed feelings for him, and the two eventually became a couple, giving rise to the famous Song of Lothine. However, Baron is only 10 years old now, while Lothine is approximately 3,400 years old. If Lothine were to come here and become a teacher, she and Baron would be teacher and student, making it unlikely they would become a couple in the future. His appearance has altered the course of many lives, causing a wondrous change in the grand symphony of Middle-earth. Oliver must have noticed this long ago. Since she hasn't come to him, it means she doesn't mind the changes in this grand symphony. This is naturally a good thing for him. 3 days later, Prince Finrod approached George again. You can set off now. Galadriel will be waiting for you in the forest of Regin near the Asgardun River. She will take you into the Grey Elf Kingdom. Rest assured, Your Highness, I will do my best to persuade Tingle to send troops. George spread his wings, left the elven city, and flew south towards Doriath. Doriath is directly south of Dorsanian, separated by the Mountain of Terror, Gorgorth, and the Valley of Death, South Donthiseb. To control Middle-earth, Morgoth poured most of his dark power into the earth, giving rise to many terrible, bloodthirsty monsters throughout Middle-earth. The Valley of Death is where Morgoth clashed with a beautiful animism, a place where various bloodthirsty monsters born from Morgoth's power gathered. Even elves would try to avoid this valley. But George wasn't willing to waste time. He flew straight over the Dread Mountains and the Valley of Death, arriving at the entrance to the Grey Elf Kingdom. This is the Ring of Miriam. It's certainly not ordinary magic. George touched the rainbow-like barrier surrounding the forest, sensing the profound spatial laws contained within it, and inwardly marveled. No wonder the Maiar could come to Middle-earth alone before the elves appeared. During Morgoth's reign, their strength was indeed far beyond that of ordinary Maiar. He felt that unless he forcibly broke through this rainbow barrier, even apparition wouldn't be able to get through. I thought you wouldn't arrive until tonight. I didn't expect you to come so quickly. Just as George was studying the rainbow barrier, an opening suddenly appeared before him, and a female elf in a white dress with long, deep golden hair walked out of the barrier with a slightly arrogant voice. Are you Princess Galadriel? Looking at the female elf before him, George roughly guessed her identity. He had seen many female elves in the elven city, and almost none of them were ugly. Galadriel, however, inherited the blood of the light elves, making her even more beautiful than the average elf. Beauty is subjective, as everyone's aesthetic sense differs. But Galadriel was beautiful to any species, not just in appearance, but also in the aura bestowed by the light power within her. It's me. You must be George. You look rather ordinary. Galadriel looked George up and down, then said, I heard you saved my brothers. Humph, if they hadn't prevented me from going, I wouldn't have been so badly beaten by those Morgoth's minions. But thank you anyway. I advise you not to have too high hopes for this trip. Tinge won't agree to send troops. Where there's a will, there's a way. George smiled. The Galadriel of today was not the mature, composed elven queen seeking forgiveness and a return to Valinor, but an arrogant, willful elven princess who loved to wander. Chapter 339 The Most Beautiful Elf, Lucia. While I don't think you'll succeed, if you need any help, feel free to ask me. The elves of Minas haven't seen humans before, so they might not be as friendly as the elves outside. Galadriel nodded, head held high, and turned to walk towards the barrier. Follow me. Miriam has granted me the right to temporarily open the barrier. George smiled and nodded as well, following Galadriel. The Noldor elves once lived in Valinor and knew from the Valinor gods that humans were the second children created by Iluvatar. They had even believed, due to Morgoth's instigation, that the gods had confined the elves to Valinor to make way for humans. Later, upon learning the truth and seeing the newly born humans, weak in every way, in Middle-earth, they naturally developed a fondness for them. The Noldor elves had always been very caring towards humans and had taught them a great deal of knowledge. However, apart from Tingle, who had been to Valinor, the other elves of the Grey Elf Kingdom had always been native to Middle-earth, isolated from the outside world. They only knew that the human race existed outside, but didn't know much about them. Therefore, most Grey Elves looked down on humans, seeing them as short-lived and weak. In the original story, Beren and Lothian fell in love, and Tingle vehemently opposed it, believing that the lowly human Beren was unworthy of his daughter. To prevent his daughter Lothian from being with Beren, he set a condition: Beren could only marry him if he retrieved a Silmaril from Morgoth and Angband. Essentially, he wanted Beren to give up or go to his death. This is why Tingle was unwilling to send troops or allow the Grey Elves to interact with the elven city of Dorsonia. Tingle didn't believe humans possessed any magic worthy of their interaction. After entering the barrier, a lush and vibrant forest appeared before George's eyes. Here, thanks to Miriam's divine power, it was spring-like all year round, and various adorable little animals hopped and jumped among the trees, completely unafraid of strangers approaching. I'm going to speed up, try your best to keep up with me. Galadriel leaped onto the trunk of a large tree and then darted between the branches at incredible speed. Her agile movements, even in a long dress, had no effect on her. Elves are generally more physically gifted than humans, and besides magic and blacksmithing, their eyesight is also outstanding. They are all excellent archers. Galadriel possesses the blood of 3 types of elves: Vanya, Noldor, and Sea Elves. She excels in all aspects, and in terms of overall strength, she is even stronger than her 3 brothers. What she said earlier wasn't exactly boasting. Lost him so quickly? I thought he was so great. I'd better slow down and wait for him. Galadriel moved at full speed for a while, then realized that George had disappeared from sight. She assumed that George couldn't keep up with her speed and had been left behind, so she smugly slowed down. When her 2 brothers came earlier, they raved about George, this human, so much that it ignited her competitive spirit. She wanted to see just how capable a mere human really was. Princess Galadriel, no need to slow down, I can keep up. Just then, a voice suddenly came from above her. Looking up, she saw George with a pair of pure white wings spread behind him, leisurely flying above her head. Why you can fly. Galadriel stopped, standing on the trunk of a large tree. Her eyes filled with surprise as she looked at George. George hovered in front of Galadriel, replying with equal surprise, "Didn't the 2 princes tell you? It was precisely because I can fly that I was able to catch up with the eldest prince to provide support." Of course they did, but I forgot. Galadriel chuckled awkwardly upon hearing this. "Since you can fly, then take me with you. I'll show you the way, that way will be faster." At the banquet hosted by her great-uncle Tinge, she had heard her 2 brothers boast about how powerful George was in front of Tinge, and she was quite resentful. She thought that her 2 brothers were just trying to get Tinge to send troops, deliberately raising the level of human strength. So she didn't listen much and couldn't resist going out to play. She only knew that George led the humans to help the elves, which ultimately allowed them to hold the central defenses and repel Morgoth's attacking army. She didn't know the details. "My honor." George lowered the altitude, put his arm around Galadriel's waist, and flew her above the trees, continuing forward according to her directions. Galadriel, flying for the first time, seemed quite excited and happily became George's guide, helping him further understand the Grey Elf Kingdom. Galadriel's magic was good, but she didn't possess flight magic. Or rather, in Middle-earth, apart from gods like the Valar and Maiar, and some winged creatures, other races didn't have the ability to fly. Otherwise, the Noldor elves wouldn't have slaughtered the Sea Elves to seize ships and leave Valinor. Therefore, this was Galadriel's first time flying. Wait a minute, fly that way, I think I see Lothian. After flying for about half an hour, a strange city built in the middle of a forest appeared before George. This city was entirely constructed from the intertwined roots of living trees, covering an area more than 10 times the size of the elven city of Dorsonia. It was the Grey Elf city of Minnegith. However, just as they were nearing Minnegith, Galadriel suddenly had George change direction. Lucian is Ting's most beloved daughter. If she can put in a good word for you, then sending troops is unlikely. Sending Grey Elves to your school to exchange magic shouldn't be a problem. Lucian was Ting's daughter, making her her aunt, but elves generally address people by their first names, except for their parents. She addressed Ting by his name as well. Moreover, although they were aunt and aunt, their relationship was more like that of friends. Elves have no lifespan limit, there's no difference in appearance between 3,000 and 2,000 years old. Hearing Galadriel's words, George's heart stirred. He flapped his wings and flew towards the meadow Galadriel pointed to. There, on the meadow, an elven maiden was dancing gracefully. Her dress was as blue as a cloudless sky, her eyes as gray as a starry evening, her cloak embroidered with the golden flowers, and her hair as black as the shadows of twilight. Her glory and beauty were like the shimmering light on leaves, the sound of flowing water, and the stars shining above the misty sky. Even George's eyes were momentarily glazed over. Such a beautiful woman exists in this world. Galadriel had already captivated him with her beauty, but Lothian was far, far more beautiful. The most beautiful elf in Middle-earth, truly deserving of the title. Chapter 340. An elf without foresight will have immediate worries. Galantel, Luciette, who was dancing gracefully on the grass, looked surprised to see Galadriel descend from the sky, especially upon seeing George with a pair of white wings on his back. Is he the human hero George? Hero? I wouldn't dare call myself one. I only helped with a small matter, George replied modestly, somewhat regretful that Luciette hadn't finished his dance. Luciette looked George up and down, her eyes full of curiosity. This is the first time I've seen a human. You're very humble. I've heard Angrid and Anor talk about you. They said you made the giant stone statues move to help in battle, that you can fly, that your magic repelled Sauron, killed the dragon, and forced Morgoth's army to retreat to Angbin. Galadriel had left when Angrid and Anor told their father, Tingle, about these things, but she had always been there. She had lived in the forest of Regin since birth and had never seen the outside world. Since Galadriel's arrival in her stories of the outside world, she had been filled with curiosity about it. So, she was very interested when Angrid and Agnor recounted George's heroic deeds that day. However, her father, Ting, didn't believe them at all, thinking they were lying to get him to send troops. She wasn't entirely convinced either, but seeing George descend from the sky with Galadriel, she thought perhaps Angrid and Agnor weren't lying. Really? Your magic is that powerful? Galadriel's eyes lit up as she looked at George. Remembering the letter her older brother had written and George's magical wings, she secretly felt she might have underestimated this human. 140 years ago, she and her 3 brothers had seen the first humans who migrated westward. Those humans were poorly clothed, had no writing or language of their own, and were only slightly better than some monkeys. Later, she came to the Grey Elf Kingdom to learn from her great-aunt, Merrill, and strengthen herself, and hadn't seen humans since. Therefore, in her stereotype, humans were far from being powerful. It's like you once saw a group of stray cats, and then a decade or so later, someone suddenly tells you that one of their descendants helped humanity win a modern war. That cat created space-based weapons and swiftly destroyed an invading alien spaceship. It's absurd. That's a bit of an exaggeration. The eldest prince deserves half the credit for repelling Sauron, and killing the dragon was a joint effort between me and the 3 princes, George replied honestly, without exaggerating his achievements. The second and third princes might have exaggerated his feats to get Ting to send troops, which wasn't good. Ting already didn't believe them. Further exaggeration would only make it seem more unbelievable. However, given his current strength, he could indeed single-handedly repel Sauron and kill the dragon. So your magic is really powerful. Could you demonstrate it? Galadriel's tone was filled with excitement. In the entire Grey Elf Kingdom, apart from Tinge, Miriam, and Lothine, no one was her match. If George was truly that powerful, then besides the possibility of succeeding in the task her elder brother had entrusted to her, she would also have a worthy opponent to spar with frequently. How could she not be happy? Lucia loved singing and dancing, but disliked fighting. She couldn't spar with her great-uncle and great-aunt, and there wasn't a single capable Grey Elf in the Elven City. She was quite bored every day. Hearing Galadriel's words, Lucia's face also showed anticipation. She also wanted to see what human magic was like, whether it was as wondrous as Ingrid and Honor had described. Of course, but not now, and not here. I wish to invite the Grey Elves to my school to exchange magic, and I also hope His Majesty the King will be willing to send troops to fight Morgoth's army. So, in a moment, I will demonstrate my magic before His Majesty the King, so that he will believe that what the two princes said was not a lie, George replied with a smile. Yes, then let's hurry and go find Tinge. Lucia, you must put in a good word for him with Tinge later, he always listens to you the most. Galadriel's eyes lit up, and she clung to Lucia's arm, acting all cute. Lucia replied somewhat helplessly, it'll probably be difficult. My father has many concerns, and the nobles don't want war. There's a saying, elves who lack foresight will have immediate troubles. If they only care about immediate gains and ignore potential future problems, it will be too late when the problems erupt, George interjected. Lucia had a great influence on Tinge, and if Lucia was willing to help, the chances of persuading Tinge would increase. Elves who lack foresight will have immediate troubles, that's very true. I didn't expect that you, as a human, with only a few decades of life, would possess such wisdom. Hearing George's words, Lucia's gaze towards George instantly changed. If before it was just curiosity, now it held a touch of admiration. The moment she first saw George, she was drawn to a certain aura about him, an aura of vast knowledge and rich experience. As an elven princess who had lived in the same place for thousands of years, she truly admired this quality. If George could read Lothine's mind now and understand her thoughts, he would understand perfectly why this was happening. Although his avatar in this world was human and had only lived for a little over a decade, he actually had avatars in many other worlds, whose experiences were absolutely extraordinary and unimaginable to the people of this world. This was similar to how a pampered, sheltered rich girl would always be attracted to a worldly young man with rich experiences. I will do my best to persuade father to send troops. I knew you were the best. Galadriel spun Lothine around twice before putting her down. At this moment, Galadriel had not yet experienced the despair and pain of seeing her brothers and the entire Noldor lineage perish, their skulls piled up like mountains by Morgoth's army. So she was still that proud elven princess with dreams, a love for battle and honor. Lothine was clearly used to Galadriel's behavior and didn't mind. She simply smiled and said to George, "Come with me, I'll take you directly to my father." "Thank you very much, Princess Lothine." George gave an elven salute and followed behind Lothine and Galadriel. Chapter 341 The Magnificent Thousand-Stone Cave Palace. Lothine was gentle and kind, while Galadriel was lively and adorable. The two elven princesses walking together immediately became the most beautiful sight in the elven city. All the elves who passed by bowed respectfully to Lothine and Galadriel, and most of the male elves looked at the two princesses with admiration in their eyes. As for George, the human behind the two princesses, the elves only glanced at him curiously and then ignored him. In the eyes of the Grey Elves, humans were no different from cats and dogs on the street, not worth paying attention to. Entering the majestic elven city, passing through the long wooden streets, they arrived at the Thousand-Stone Caves Palace, built by the dwarves for the Grey Elven Kingdom. Lothine asked an elven guard, "Where's my father now?" "Over in the palace hall. 22 nobles have something to discuss with him," the elven guard replied respectfully. In the elven kingdoms of Middle-earth, the king did not hold absolute power. Rather, the king was the highest-ranking noble in the entire country, with many other elven nobles below him. If a decision of the king was opposed by all the nobles, then that decision could not be implemented. In George's memory, in the original story, when Fëanor's eldest son, Mazrus, heard the news that Beren and Lothine had successfully stolen a Silmaril, his hope for the fight against Morgoth was rekindled. He then rallied his brothers, Fëanor's other sons, and allied with Fingon, the High King of the Noldor, along with men and dwarves, to form an alliance to attack Angband once more. However, because two of Fëanor's sons had previously attempted to kidnap Lothine, Tingle again refused the alliance's invitation. Moreover, those two scoundrels had previously been swindling and cheating in Narmer's Thrond, leading the noble elves of Thrond to oppose an alliance with Mazras's lineage. Due to the nobles' opposition, the future High King Fingon had no choice but to bring his personal guard to support his friend Mazras. The result was disastrous. The alliance was utterly defeated, and High King Fingon fought to the last moment, finally slain by Gothmog, the Balrog king, when he was caught between two Balrogs. Therefore, to get the Grey Elf Kingdom to fight, besides persuading Tinge, at least half of the elven nobles also needed to be convinced. Since all the nobles were present, that was perfect. HMPH, these guys teaming up can't be anything good. They're probably just trying to get their useless heirs to marry you again, Galadriel sneered upon hearing the elven guard's words. The Grey Elf Kingdom had always been peaceful and stable, without war. The only major event that could gather all 22 nobles together was to ask them to marry their sons to Lothian. This wasn't the first time this had happened. First, Lothian was universally acknowledged as the most beautiful elf, and no unmarried male elf didn't want to marry her. Second, Tinge only had one daughter. Whoever married Lothian would be the future king of the Grey Elf Kingdom, and that line of nobles would greatly increase their power throughout the kingdom. However, Tinge's standards were too high. He looked down on the children of those nobles. Even the 7 sons of Fëanor, Tinge felt none were worthy of his daughter Lothian, let alone the children of these nobles. Therefore, the nobles always returned empty-handed. Of course, many suitors sought to marry Galadriel. But her fate was beyond Tinge's control, and her own requirement for a partner was that he must be at least better than her. The noble children had all challenged her for this, only to be thoroughly beaten. Except for her cousin, Celeborn, the bookish Nord who preferred reading to fighting. Celeborn's grandfather, Elmo, was the younger brother of her maternal grandfathers, Tinge and Orlwë, making Celeborn her little cousin. Father won't agree to marry me to them. Let's go in, the nobles are all here. Luciette, knowing her father well, smiled and shook his head, leading Galadriel and George across the stone bridge into the Thousand-Stone Palace. What a magnificent palace! Entering the underground palace, looking at the high halls and private chambers carved from natural rock, and the countless luminous pearls and various gems inlaid in the stone, George couldn't help but sigh. Before Morgoth was imprisoned in Valinor and the older elves arrived in Middle-earth, the Grey Elves were considered the kings of the continent, possessing virtually all of the land's treasures. However, after the dwarves conquered the land, all the palace's wealth was looted. The wealth of the Dwarven Kingdom under Smaug's rule in the Third Age was partly due to the dwarves' ancestors' actions. Led by Lothian, they arrived at the most magnificent main hall of the Caverns of 1,000 Stones. On the throne sat a strikingly handsome male elf with long silver hair, wearing a golden crown inlaid with rubies and bright crystals, and towering half a head taller than the average Grey Elf. He was one of the 3 Elven kings invited by Vala Orome to Valinor to see the 2 trees, the only Grey Elf to have been bathed in the tree's light, and the only one to have married a Matir. When he saw his daughter Lothian appear at the hall's entrance, a kind, paternal smile immediately spread across his face. My daughter Lothian, as radiant as a pearl, you've returned. Good afternoon, father. This is George, the human hero Galadriel brought back. He's a very wise man, and I think you should hear his thoughts. Lothian bowed to Tingle and stepped forward to Tingle's throne. Galadriel also strode to the other side of Tingle's throne. Your Majesty, I've mentioned this to you before. Oh, I remember. Finrod, that boy, too. I've already made it clear, but he still won't give up. Tingle smiled and shook his head, then looked at George below. Very well, since my daughter admires you, and since all the nobles of the kingdom are here, I'll give you a chance to speak again. If it weren't for his daughter Lothian and Galadriel speaking on his behalf, as the noble Grey Elf King, the first elf to be born, humans wouldn't even be qualified to see him. He had originally thought that if the human Finrod sent arrived at Thousand Stone Caves, he would simply have him send away. The 22 elven noble leaders of the Grey Elf Kingdom, along with their heirs standing behind them, all turned their gazes to George. Some were curious, some admired, and a few were jealous, seeing the 2 most beautiful elven princesses, Lucia and Galadriel, speaking up for a human. Chapter 342 The power of humanity is beyond your imagination. George, unfazed by the situation, first bowed politely to Tinge, then smiled and said, I've come on behalf of the Crown Prince and humanity, mainly to discuss 2 matters with His Majesty the King. First, I've established an academy in the elven city of Dorsanian, hoping that humans, elves, and dwarves can exchange knowledge and improve their strength together. Second, I hope Minigus can send troops to help fight the Balrog King's Balrog army and rebuild the Angband defenses. You human, Tinge replied, Angrid and Anor have already discussed these two matters with me, and I've given them clear answers. There's no need to bring them up again. Since you're an envoy sent by Finrod, I'll allow you to stay here for a while, then leave with some jewels. Hearing George's words, Tinge laughed, finding George's argument a joke. A mere human dares to utter such arrogant words. Hurry up and thank His Majesty for his favor and step back. It's already an honor for you to stand in this palace. One of the noble heirs stepped forward, pointing at George with contemptuous eyes and rebuking him. Allison, do you even have the right to speak here? Shut up, or I'll knock out your other front tooth when we get out. Galadriel, hearing someone causing trouble for George, immediately arrogantly brandished her delicate white fist. Whether George was as strong as her two brothers claimed was uncertain, but he was still sent by her eldest brother and personally received by her. He was practically on her side. How could she allow other elves to bully him? Hearing this, the noble heir named Allison immediately hid behind his father in fear. Galantel, I'm only going easy on you because you're an elf. Don't think I can't beat you. He had pursued Galadriel when she first came to the kingdom, but Galadriel's standards for a partner were that she had to be better than him, so he and other elves had challenged her to a duel. The result was that he lost a front tooth and dislocated both arms. Besides, I'm not wrong. He's just a human, yet he wants to exchange knowledge with us elves. Does he deserve it? This is Allison, right? Have you ever heard of Snagif from the crypts? George turned to Allison, his tone hardening. He was representing the Fingolfin and Finrod lineages of elves and humans, seeking cooperation and mutual benefit with the Grey Elves, not begging them for favors. There was no need to be subservient. That would only make Tinge and the other elven nobles look down on him. He needed to be strong himself. If he was strong enough, he wouldn't be afraid of provocation, and a strong response would be more effective. In war, allies won't cooperate with you because you humble yourself and compromise. They'll only cooperate for the common benefits you can bring them. What? The snagger from the underground caves? Allison was somewhat bewildered. George smiled and explained, the snarker are a type of orc. Because of their small size and weak attack power, they mainly live in the lowest dungeons of Angband, doing manual labor and chores. One day, while delivering food to the prison, he encountered a captured Noldor elf. He boasted to the Noldor elf about how wonderful his living conditions were, that he could eat until he was 7/10 full every day and wasn't whipped. The elf, however, looked disdainful and told him about the vastness of Middle-earth outside the dungeons, outside Angband, and the luxurious lives of the elves in Valinor. After hearing the elf's description, the snarker realized how narrow-minded he had been. PFFT, what an interesting analogy. You are indeed an interesting human. Lothine, sitting beside the throne, was quick-witted and immediately understood George's meaning, bursting into laughter. Allison, after a moment of stunned silence, finally realized that George was mocking him. Human, I challenge you to a duel. Allison, his face flushed red with shame at his humiliation before Princess Lucia, immediately drew his elven sword and threw it in front of George. King Tinge, seated on his throne, coldly addressed George. Human, do you accept Allison's challenge? If you refuse, I will consider everything you said before as the arrogant ravings of a coward. Our Grey Elf Kingdom does not welcome such weaklings. You may leave now. George's story, ostensibly a mockery of Allison, actually included the entire Grey Elf Kingdom, including himself. Therefore, he naturally held little liking for George. He eagerly awaited seeing George humiliated by Allison before sending his men to throw this arrogant human out of the forest. I accept. Don't underestimate humans. Their strength is beyond your imagination. George kicked the elven sword on the ground, and it swiftly returned to Allison's scabbard, causing everyone to frown. This human seems to have some skill. Actually, George didn't possess the superb technique of kicking the sword back into its sheath. His physical body was indeed strong, but that was all. He wasn't a martial artist capable of precise control over his strength. Even when he occasionally fought with his bare hands, he wasn't a technique-based fighter, but rather the type who relied on brute force to overpower any skill. So, his stylish sword return just now was simply due to his superpower of controlling metal. Let alone returning a sword to its sheath. With his current abilities, controlling a sword to take someone's head from 1,000 miles away wouldn't be a problem at all. Inside the hall, Allison and George stood facing each other. Two elven guards clad in golden armor carried in a huge weapon rack, displaying various elven weapons, elven swords, elven spears, elven bows and arrows, elven hand axes, and so on. Human, I won't use this rising sun sword. Let's choose weapons of equal quality from this rack and have a fair duel. Allison tossed aside the elven longsword, which was several levels superior to those on the rack, and then selected an elven sword and an elven bow. Although the Grey Elves weren't blessed by the twin trees and were individually weaker than the Nolder Elves, their archery skills were slightly superior due to their long-term residence in the forest. Moreover, Doriath was constantly enveloped by the divine power of Marion, making the Grey Elves born there physically stronger than the Green Elves from the Far East who had never migrated. Naturally, they were also much stronger than humans. I'm a mage. I don't need a weapon, you can use whatever you like, George smiled. Although Allison's words were unpleasant, he wasn't a bad person, and he planned to give him some face later. Chapter 343 Magic, Showcase. Trying to compete with us elves in magic, Allison laughed in exasperation. The Grey Elves' magic originated from the guidance of Marion, who, although a Mayor, shared the same lineage as the plant goddess Yavanna and had served the flower goddess Vanna and the resting goddess Asti and Valinor. Therefore, Grey Elves could learn plant, sound, and hypnotic magic. In terms of the sheer number of spells they mastered, Grey Elves were no less capable than the Nolder Elves. Plant binding, Allison chanted the spell, and several wrist-thick vines instantly sprouted from beneath his feet, coiling towards George. He felt that perhaps he wouldn't even need to use swordsmanship or arrows, his plant magic alone could teach this arrogant human a lesson. Facing the onrushing vines, George didn't even raise his hand. He opened his mouth, and a burst of three-colored flames erupted, instantly burning the vines to ashes. This level of attack is useless against me. That fire, Tinge, who had been sitting on the throne watching the show, sat up straight as soon as he sensed the immense power contained in the flames George spewed. Looks like you do have some skill. Allison was also taken aback when he saw that George could breathe fire, but he didn't think he would lose. For elves, magic was just an aid, the real battle was close combat and archery. He took out his elven bow, knocked an arrow, and aimed at George, his tone full of confidence. Next, I will shoot 5 arrows in succession, hitting your 2 arms, 2 legs, and the pants between your legs, pinning you to the ground. In terms of archery skills, he could rank among the top 30 in the entire Grey Elf Kingdom, and elven arrows were all metal arrows, impervious to fire. Allison instantly drew his elven longbow to its full extent and fired 5 arrows in succession. Because his hand speed was too fast and his technique too high, the later arrows caught up with the earlier ones, finally maintaining the same speed as the previous ones as they shot towards George. Allison's archery skills have improved again. The elven nobles couldn't help but admire Allison's 5 arrows fired in quick succession. On the battlefield, against orcs, this would be a guaranteed 5 kill. Arrows? I can do that too, but light arrows. A white magic circle lit up in front of George. Light magic, rain of light, a dense barrage of light arrows shot out, instantly deflecting the 5 arrows and heading straight for Allison. Seeing this, Allison quickly dodged the barrage and drew his elven sword, charging towards George. No matter how skilled he was at archery, he couldn't possibly fire so many magic arrows instantly like his opponent. A long-range archery duel would inevitably result in his defeat. Therefore, close combat was the only way to win. Allison moved quickly, reaching George's side in the blink of an eye, his exquisite swordsmanship, honed over 1,000 years, attacking him. Watch out, Lucian, standing beside the throne, couldn't help but warn him, noticing that George hadn't turned to look at Allison, seemingly unaware of his attack. However, she was wrong. When Allison's sword was still a meter away from George, the magic circle beneath his feet lit up. Light magic, domain of light, a barrier of light formed around George, then rapidly expanded and exploded outwards, forcefully deflecting Allison's elven longsword. Giant magic, arm giantization, simultaneously. George stretched out his right hand, which rapidly expanded and grew into a giant arm, grabbing Allison in his grasp. Despite Allison's desperate struggles, he couldn't break free. Holding Allison, George turned to Tinge and the group of elven nobles. The spells I just demonstrated are the light magic and giant magic I currently teach at the school. I believe that with the intelligence of the elves, learning these spells at our school shouldn't be difficult. Tinge and the elven nobles fell silent upon hearing George's words. The spells George had just demonstrated clearly possessed powerful light energy, something the Grey Elves lacked. The Nilder Elves were stronger than the Grey Elves primarily because they were bathed in the light of the two trees, possessing the power of light within them, which could restrain Morgoth's dark army. But if the Grey Elves could learn the magic of this human, George, they would also possess similar power of light and would no longer need to fear Morgoth's army. It must be understood that during the age of the two trees, before the Nolder Elves arrived in Middle-earth, Morgoth, possessing the three Silmarils, repeatedly led orc armies to attack the Grey Elf Kingdom. Although Merion had set up the Merion Ring to block them, Morgoth's power continued to spread towards the Grey Elf Kingdom. To alleviate the pressure on his wife Merion, Tinge led the Grey Elf army in several major battles against Morgoth's orc army on the border of Doriath. However, the orcs were tough and resilient, fearless of death, and their numbers were terrifying, making the battle extremely difficult for them. If the Nilder Elves hadn't later landed in Middle-earth, forcing Morgoth to withdraw his army, it's uncertain whether the Grey Elf Kingdom could have held out. However, elves are very proud, and the idea of learning magic from humans they look down upon is a real mental hurdle, so they are currently conflicted. Seeing the elves' complete silence, George's face immediately broke into a smile. Silence signifies hesitation, and hesitation means the Grey Elves are already tempted, they just need him to add a little something extra. Actually, I was afraid of hurting this person, so the power of the magic I cast was less than 1% of its usual strength. Seeing the eyes of the elves, including Tinge, widen instantly, he continued, elves far surpass humans in magical aptitude. If I, a human, can cast magic with this kind of power, then elves, with their infinite lifespans and the ability to continuously study magic, will only be stronger than me when casting the same magic in the future. The power of the magic you just cast was really less than 1% of its usual strength. Tinge jumped up from his throne. If George's magic was truly that powerful, and if the Grey Elves could learn such magic, then what would they have to fear from Morgoth and his orc army? If you don't believe me, I can demonstrate it for you all, but there's not enough space here, so it's best to go outside. George released Allison, his arm returning to normal size, and replied. Tinge didn't hesitate and immediately waved his hand, saying, "All right, then let's go outside the palace to watch your demonstration." Even if the power were increased tenfold, let alone 100-fold, he would immediately agree to let the Grey Elves go to George's school to exchange and learn magic. Elves may be proud, but they are not stupid. They would not refuse to learn magic that could enhance the entire kingdom's fighting power just because they are proud. Chapter 344 Giving the Elves a Little Shock. George, I didn't expect what my second and third brothers said to be true. Where did you learn all that magic? On the way out of the palace, Galadriel pulled Lucy aside and asked George. Based on George's strength displayed in the palace, he wasn't actually her match, but if his strength were 100 times greater, she definitely wouldn't be able to beat him. So she was very curious about where George, a human, had learned so much powerful magic. Well, how should I put it? A mysterious person taught me, but I don't know who he is, George said casually. He couldn't explain this kind of thing, so he could only make it up. Anyway, no one could call him out on it. Even if he said Iluvatar taught him, unless Iluvatar specifically denied it, no one could verify it. The mysterious man, could it be Oromi Ardlin, the god of the hunt? I've heard he often travels to Middle-earth, Galadriel analyzed with some doubt, but I've never heard of him being skilled in this kind of light and giant magic. Could it be some other god? George, that little story you told was very interesting. Was it true, or did you make it up? Are there any similar stories? Lucia wasn't interested in magic or combat, but she was very interested in the little story George told about Snagga in the crypt. She had never heard such an interesting little story before. Well, I heard it from someone else. George's eyes lit up. We have many interesting stories like that where I am from. If you're interested, you can come to our school to exchange ideas, and I can tell you about them slowly. For example, there's another similar little story called Snagga sitting in the crypt gazing at the sky. Snagga sitting in the crypt gazing at the sky. Lucia's beautiful eyes were full of curiosity. George slowly recounted, one day, a Snagga was working in a burrow when suddenly a bat, disguised as a vampire, descended from the sky. The bat said to the working Snagga, I've flown over 1,000 miles and am thirsty. Go get me some blood. The Snagga, who had never left the burrow, replied skeptically, don't exaggerate. The entrance to the burrow is only so big, why would you need to fly that far? The vampire burst into laughter, you ignorant half-orc. "The sky is boundless and vast," the snagga retorted with a silly grin. "I work in the burrow every day. I can see the sky whenever I'll look up." "I can't be mistaken," the vampire cursed. "You fool. If you don't believe me, wait until you leave the burrow with the army to fight the elves I know." This story is similar to the one you told in the palace before. Both aim to illustrate a narrow perspective and limited knowledge. Lucian's silvery laughter rang out, causing the elven noble heirs who wanted to marry her to widen their eyes. They had never seen Princess Lucian so happy, but unfortunately, the laughter wasn't directed at them, but at a mere human. Well, this human was indeed somewhat extraordinary, not something that could be described as mere. "Princess Lucian, you are very clever," George said, giving Lucian a thumbs up. Of course they were similar. One was a frog in a well, the other had a limited perspective, but he had adapted it to better fit the current world's context and make it easier for the people of this world to understand. He wasn't talking to Lucian about this to flirt with her, but rather hoping to attract her to his school to exchange magical knowledge. Lucian was even more powerful than Galadriel. Possessing the blood of the Mayor and a former elven king, her spells could even hypnotize Morgoth, and she had received the true teachings of Marion. If she could become a teacher at the school, it would be a good thing for both the students and him. Lucian, like a curious child, gave a thumbs up. "Does this gesture mean intelligence to you humans?" You could say that," George nodded with a smile. Lucian gave George a thumbs up. "You're intelligent too. You humans are quite an interesting race. This guy, is he trying to seduce my daughter, over there?" Ting saw his daughter Lucian laughing happily beside George, and a dangerous expression immediately appeared on his face. He absolutely couldn't accept his precious daughter falling in love with a human. Even if that human was a hero with powerful magic, it wouldn't work. Because humans only live for a few decades, while elves live infinitely. If the human died, his daughter would be heartbroken. Elves die in two ways: one is being killed, and the other is losing the will to live, in which case their souls also return to the Hall of Mandus. To put it more bluntly, even if a human and an elf fall in love and die together, their souls will not be able to meet in the Hall of Mandus. Human souls, after death, are not under the jurisdiction of Mandus, they go directly to Iluvatar. Fortunately, his thoughts didn't last long, and they had already arrived outside the Palace of the Thousand Stone Caves. The Grey Elves outside, seeing King Tingle and the various elven nobles appear in the city at the same time, all curiously gathered around. "George, you can show your magic now," Tingle said to George. This time, he no longer called George human, but addressed him by his name. Clearly, the strength George had just displayed had caught his attention. "Now I will cast the giant magic, gigantification." Magic circles lit up on George's body, and his body began to expand rapidly, quickly transforming into a giant 100 meters tall. He clapped his hands together, and the resulting wind instantly dispersed the clouds in the sky. One could imagine how powerful his punch would be. "So big. He reminds me of the god of war, Takas." "Could it be that Takas taught him magic?" Galadriel exclaimed loudly, looking at George transformed into a 100-meter giant. She had heard her grandfather say that Tadras, the god of war, could transform into a giant tens of thousands of meters tall to fight. During the first war against Morgoth by the gods, it was Tadras who dealt Morgoth a heavy blow, binding him with the chains of Anganur, forged from Mora, and taking him back to Valinor for judgment. Besides Galadriel, Tingle and all the other elves present were also deeply shocked. "We must communicate. We must communicate. If humans could learn such powerful magic, then surely the elves could too." However, George's impact on the elves didn't stop there. "I've heard that the Valley of Death is filled with dark creatures born because of Morgoth, so today I will transform the Valley of Death into the Valley of Light." George, now in giant form, clasped his hands together. "Light magic, fairy law." If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 345, He's Become the Savior Again? Above the Valley of Death, outside the border of Doriath, a colossal magic circle formed. As George's elven law activated, a blinding pillar of light instantly rose into the Valley of Death, the powerful light forcing the Grey Elves to close their eyes. When the light faded, they opened their eyes. George had returned to his normal size, though his face was slightly pale. That attack had drained a considerable amount of his life force. But it was alright, He could replenish it by finding some ancient trees on the way back to Dorsonian. This is my strongest light magic. Your Majesty, you can send someone to the Valley of Death to see. The dark creatures bred by Morgoth's power have all been wiped out by me. Good, good. Tinge was stunned for a moment before reacting. That power of light was simply too strong. Even he, as the first Elven King, was greatly startled. He had only felt such powerful light power when he went to Valinor. It was power approaching that of a god. No need to verify anymore. I can sense that the Valley of Death has been purified. Not a single dark creature remains alive. Just then, countless petals fell, coalescing into a beautiful woman dressed in green, radiating divine light. Why are you here? Upon seeing the woman, Tinge's face softened with tenderness as he stepped forward and took her hand. Luciette, like a little girl, ran up and hugged her. Mother, you've come. Indeed, this was one of the strongest Maz, Tinge's wife, Luciette's mother, the goddess Marion. Miriam gently stroked Luciette's head, then looked at George and asked, was your light magic taught to you by the great goddess of light, Varda Alander? Among the Valor, the most skilled in light magic was the goddess of light, Varda. She was the head of all female Valor, or rather, the Valley, and the wife of Manwë, the king of the gods. If anyone could teach humanity such powerful light magic, it would likely only be Varda. I don't know either. The person who taught me magic has never shown their face, and I don't know if they are male or female, or who they are, George replied without batting an eye. However, if the Grey Elves are willing to come to my school to exchange magic, I am willing to teach them the spells I just cast without reservation. Tinge, I think his suggestion is very good. You can consider it carefully. Marilyn stared at George for 3 seconds, then turned to Tinge and said. Since marrying Tinge and using all her divine power to construct the ring, she had never returned to Valinor. Because once she left, the ring would disappear, and the Grey Elf Kingdom would no longer be under her protection. Therefore, she didn't know what happened in Valinor, nor could she verify whether Varda had taught this human light magic. But she felt that no one but Varda could teach humans such powerful light magic. And that giant magic just now also seemed to be Takas's ability. Could it be that the gods, out of pity for the elves and humans, planned to secretly help them fight against Morgoth? If that's truly the case, then this human George is the chosen savior of the gods, and his suggestion is well worth considering. Alright, George, I promise you, I will send the strongest and most qualified group of Grey Elves to your school to learn and exchange knowledge with humans, Noldor Elves, and Dwarves. Tinge had already intended to agree, and after his wife Marion's suggestion, he immediately made his decision. Father. Then I'll lead the team, Lothian volunteered. No, Tinge refused without hesitation. My daughter, the outside world is too dangerous for you. Without the protection of your father and mother, your future will no longer be safe. Staying here, no one can harm you, not even Morgoth, father, but I want to go out and see the world. Don't worry, the Valley of Death has been cleared by George, there will be no more danger from Dorsonian to here. Lothian looked at her mother, Marion, pleading for her to speak on her behalf. Meryl saw through Lothian's thoughts, closed her eyes as if sensing something, and after a moment looked at Tinge and smiled. Let her go. I sense that her fate will change because of this. For the better, I will go with Lothian. My 3 brothers, George, and I will be there. We will protect Lothian. Galadriel also stepped forward at this moment. Tinge frowned deeply upon hearing this. He could ignore what others said, but his wife's words made him hesitate. If Lothian's trip to Dorsonian was truly for her own good, then he shouldn't stop her. Alright, I agree to let you lead the team, but you must be careful not to be deceived by sweet talk outside, especially be wary of certain humans. Tinge agreed, but at the end, he deliberately glanced at George, his gaze full of warning. George could only shrug helplessly. Your Majesty, the first matter is settled, so let's discuss the second. Regarding the matter of sending troops, I'm afraid I cannot agree. Even if I did, the nobles would not agree. Tinge rejected George again, but this time his tone was noticeably less firm. The nobles gathered around Tinge, shaking their heads as he had predicted. They had fought Morgoth's army before the First Age and knew its power well. They didn't want to be dragged into another war. They cherished their current peaceful and stable life. George, of course, saw through the Grey Elf nobles' thoughts at a glance. Forgive my bluntness, but the Grey Elf Kingdom's stability is mainly built on the protection of the ring. If one day the ring disappears, then tell me, can you still withstand Morgoth's army? The Queen protects us, how could a ring possibly disappear? The elven nobles all shook their heads. George looked at Merriam. "Your Majesty, if the older elves, men, and dwarves outside ultimately fall to Morgoth, and Morgoth leaves Angband to personally lead an orc army to attack the Grey Elf Kingdom, can the ring hold? Morgoth's divine power far surpasses mine. Even if most of his power is used to invade the land, I certainly cannot contend with him." Merriam shook her head. She could use the ring to defend against the orc army because Morgoth feared the god's wrath upon Middle-earth, and therefore never dared to leave Angband to attack personally. Of course, the Grey Elves were unaware of this. "I had some family matters to attend to today, so I rushed to finish this draft overnight and am posting it ahead of schedule." Chapter 346 George the Great Orator. "Look," George said, "even the Queen's ring isn't foolproof. Have you forgotten the carnage when Morgoth's army invaded Doriath? Have you forgotten your loved ones killed by the orcs?" George cast a megaphone spell to amplify his voice so all the Grey Elves could hear. To put it bluntly, the Queen's ring played a part in Doriath's peace, but the greater reason was the Angband line, built by the older elves. The Angband line held Morgoth and his dark army within its walls, bringing peace to Middle-earth. Now that the Angband line has fallen, if Doriath refuses to help the older elves and men today, do you think Morgoth will spare Doriath when all the older elves and men are wiped out by Morgoth's army? George's impassioned words silenced all the Grey Elves. Were the Grey Elves foolish? Of course not. It's hard to say whether elves or humans are more intelligent, but elves have lived longer and accumulated more wisdom. They are basically all cultured individuals. To give an example, humans are like a small minority of college students, while the majority are illiterate and uneducated. They can't understand the profound truths you preach. But elves are like college students, some from top-tier universities, others from ordinary ones. They can understand the profound truths you preach. The only question is whether they're willing to take the risks. Morgoth's goal is to conquer all Middle-earth. He will not spare a single elf. They will either be killed or enslaved as orcs. I, as a human, cannot bear this humiliation, and I imagine you, as noble elves, cannot bear it even more. Elves, dwarves, and humans, we are one. When the whole is in peril, the individual cannot be spared. We cannot forget the impending danger because of temporary comfort. George then proceeded to launch into a 2-hour-long lecture, employing various modified versions of proverbs and idioms, quoting classical texts, analyzing the global situation, and explaining the pros and cons from the perspective of the Grey Elves. He used a mix of motivational rhetoric, encouragement, and flattery, before finally stopping. He spoke of things like born in hardship, die in comfort, when the nest is overturned, no egg remains intact, and be prepared for danger in times of peace, emphasizing that elves, born of heaven and earth, cannot remain subservient to Morgoth for long. He felt he had exhausted all his resources, and if the Grey Elves remained adamant, he would have no further recourse. Having managed to persuade the Grey Elves to join his school, he had already achieved most of his goal. It would be best if the Grey Elves sent troops, but if not, it wouldn't be a major problem. When George finished his speech, all the Grey Elves were speechless. Even Marion, the Maya, looked at George with astonishment. George had delivered an overwhelming amount of information in those 2 hours, the philosophical anecdotes, the clear and logical analysis, the predictions of potential future crises, all of which had overwhelmed the Grey Elves. It took them a long time to process everything in George's speech. "George, you are truly a very wise human." Tinge looked at George with admiration. "You're right. We are all elves. Even if Ferner's lineage is unforgivable, the other elves are not wrong, and neither are the creatures of Middle-earth. We Grey Elves cannot simply hide in the Queen's ring." In fact, he had been completely convinced halfway through George's speech. But the more he listened, the more he benefited, so he didn't interrupt. "What do you all think?" Tinge looked at the 22 elven noble elders. The Grey Elves' decision to send troops to help the older elves fight the Balrog army was a matter of life and death for the entire Grey Elf kingdom, and even he, as king, couldn't make the decision on his own. I agree. One by one, the elven noble elders cast their votes in favor. In the end, of the 22 elders, 15 were in favor of sending troops, 5 were still hesitant, and 2 remained steadfast in their opposition. With more than half of the elven noble elders in favor of sending troops, Tinge immediately announced, "Very well, from today onwards, the Grey Elf Kingdom enters a state of total war. Contact the Blue Mountain Dwarves at Thousand Stone Caves. We need to manufacture a large quantity of weapons and armor." I didn't expect it to actually work. Hearing Tinge's final order, George couldn't help but smile. It hadn't been in vain that he had spent 2 hours explaining. Thinking about it carefully, his success wasn't too surprising. First, he had just demonstrated sufficient strength, winning the respect of all the Grey Elves. This was very important. Without sufficient strength, even if what you say is the truth, no one will believe you. Just like who'd listen to a beggar's tips on getting rich? But when you're the world's richest person, even a thoughtless remark you make will be hailed as gospel, even becoming a belief. Secondly, this world is still in a relatively simple stage of development, lacking in conspiracies and schemes, and without a wealth of valuable lessons for future generations. The second and third princes came to Tinge, boasting about George's prowess, the strength of humanity, how they repelled Morgoth's army, and hoping Tinge would send troops to fight a Balrog army invading from the east, and so on. To Tinge and the other nobles, most of that was just boasting, meaningless and without any benefit. How could they possibly agree? It's not surprising that the second and third princes lacked experience. They had never done anything like it before. George, on the other hand, was different. The information explosion from his past life's history and experiences had given him all sorts of strange knowledge, which, while not enhancing his strength, gave him a significant advantage. There were countless real-world examples to prove it. Our academy has now brought in dwarves to participate in the exchange. The Nilder elves are working with the dwarves to research a new type of armor that can withstand fire, and the Grey elves can also join in. This will be very helpful in dealing with the Balrog. It seems that sending people to join your academy was indeed a wise decision. Tinge's face was now full of smiles. A new type of armor that can withstand the Balrog, light magic that can restrain orcs, giant magic that can enhance strength, plus the combined efforts of all elves, humans, and dwarves. It seems that completely annihilating Morgoth and his orcs is no longer a dream. Once the threat of Morgoth and the orcs is gone, then his wife Marion will no longer have to struggle to maintain the ring, and the Grey elves can roam freely outside and achieve true peace. Unfortunately, you are not an elf. Chapter 347 Elf Banquet. In Tinge's eyes, George was now exceptionally satisfactory and outstanding in every aspect. He possessed both strength and wisdom. If George were an elf, he would definitely take him as the son-in-law of the Grey Elf Kingdom and marry his daughter, Lothane, to him. Only someone as outstanding as George would be worthy of his daughter. Unfortunately, George was not an elf, but a human. Humans have limited lifespans, and even the most outstanding individuals are nothing more than a handful of dust in a few decades. That's why he had just sighed inwardly, lamenting that someone as excellent as George was not an elf, but a human. That night, Tinge held a grand banquet at the Thousand Stone Cave to formally welcome George to the Grey Elf Kingdom. At this moment, George was no longer merely a human, but a human wizard with both strength and wisdom, who had guided the Grey Elves. In a way, he was somewhat similar to the future Gandalf the Grey. The elven banquet was extremely lavish, with the hall inlaid with rare treasures, and the noble elves attending were all handsome men and beautiful women, a truly pleasing sight. The banquet was incredibly lavish, featuring a variety of exotic fruits, desserts, and meticulously prepared meats. Indeed, elves do eat meat. He had always assumed elves were vegetarians, only eating fruits, vegetables, and grains, based on his recent understanding, but they also ate meat. Elves hunted wild animals like goats and wild boars, then cooked and ate them. In their eyes, animals have life, and trees and plants have life. They are equal, and there was no reason to eat only fruits and grains and not animals. Similarly, George also saw some magical foods unique to elves at the banquet. For example, there were lambus biscuits and maruvo nectar made with special magic. Just a small piece of lambus biscuit was enough to provide enough energy to last for several days without food. Maruvo nectar could quickly eliminate fatigue and restore vitality. The atmosphere of the entire banquet was pleasant. There were no dramatic scenes of noble elven children picking a fight with him. Given his previous demonstrated strength, no elf would be so foolish. To be honest, watching a group of handsome men and beautiful women sing and dance is quite a treat. Especially Lucian's performance, her voice seemed to possess magic, captivating everyone. George felt his ears were about to be pregnant with her beautiful singing. If he didn't have strong willpower and lofty goals, he would have been tempted to marry Lucian immediately and have her sing and dance for him every day. He quite liked girls with Lucian's personality. It's just that the timing wasn't right. Many villains in stories often say that even the strongest person has weaknesses once they have lovers and children, and these weaknesses make them easily vulnerable. The heroes, on the other hand, would argue that it's precisely because of lovers and children that one has responsibility and motivation, allowing them to unleash even greater power. For George, he leaned more towards the first interpretation. Especially since his situation was unique, he had clones in different worlds. If he had no attachments, he could abandon a clone in a particular world when necessary. But with attachments, he couldn't be so carefree, and he would be much more cautious when improving his strength. For example, what if his clone in this world were with Lothian and had a child? What if he died fighting Morgoth, or clashing with the gods and Iluvatar? This is different from others. Like the teachers and classmates in the Harry Potter world, if they separated, they would never see each other again. It was just that, at most, they would miss each other occasionally. He had already retreated to the deep mountains and forests in the Wizarding Apprentice world, and the same was true for his friends in the Fairy Tale Guild world. There was even less of a connection between Academy City and Cardcaptor Sakura world. Therefore, his ideal was that he would at least reach the strength to freely travel between the various clone worlds before considering marriage and having children. That way, if anything happened, he could bring his wife, children, and some important relatives to other worlds in advance. George, let's dance. When the banquet reached its climax, the elves began to invite their partners to dance. After declining a large number of invitations, Lothian saw George sitting there drinking and went up to him. "I'm not very good at dancing," George politely declined the invitation. But Lothian simply pulled him up and ran into the dance floor with a smile. "It's all right, I'm the most skilled dancer in the kingdom besides my mother. I can teach you." "All right then." Looking at Lucia's innocent smile, George had no choice but to agree. Sitting on his throne, Tinge frowned upon seeing this. He was about to rise when Marilyn pressed him down. "Don't be so nervous. George doesn't seem to be an ordinary human, and some things won't happen just because you try to stop them." After observing him for a long time, Marilyn had noticed something was wrong with George. The life force emanating from his body was far too strong, definitely not something a normal human could possess. She even suspected that George might be a Maya disguised as a human, sent to Middle-earth. Hearing his wife Marilyn's words, Tinge thought for a moment, sighed, and didn't rise again. "Luciette, I would like to ask the Queen for guidance on magic." "Is that perhaps impolite?" Under Luciette's guidance, George, who was gradually dancing with more skill, asked Luciette directly. One of his main purposes in coming to the Grey Elf Kingdom was to ask Marilyn for guidance on magic. It would take Tinge another week to gather the Grey Elves and head to Dorsonia, and he wanted to take this opportunity to try. "No, Mother is very kind. After the banquet, I'll take you to see her alone," Lothian said, dancing with George on the ballroom, seemingly unconcerned. George thought for a moment. "Let's do it tomorrow." It seemed somewhat inappropriate to go to see Queen Marianne alone with Lothian so late at night. Although Marianne was Lothian's mother, as a Maiar, she didn't age. Judging from her appearance, she was about the same age as Lothian. Early the next morning, George, led by Lothian and Galadriel, arrived at Queen Marianne's garden. While in Valinor, Marianne had lived in Lorien's garden, tending to its exotic plants. Therefore, she didn't usually reside in the underground thousand-stone cave, but rather in a secret garden somewhere in the forest, modeled after Lorien's garden. This garden was usually only freely accessible to Tinge, Lothian, and Galadriel. Chapter 348 Crisis Approaching. "Lucia said you wished to learn magic from me." Miriam sat on a rock in the garden, watching George arrive with Lucia and Galadriel. Nightingales hopped around her, singing beautiful songs. The nightingales of this world could sing, and their songs were taught to them by Miriam. "The Queen is a deity from Valinor, and I wish to learn magic from you to further improve myself in preparation for Morgoth's future retaliation," George explained respectfully, bowing to Miriam. Marianne didn't delve into the question, smiling as she rose from the stone. "Actually, for me, many abilities have existed since my birth, just like you knew to eat and drink from birth. It's just that the elves didn't understand, so they thought it was magic. I didn't teach them magic, but only my understanding of my own abilities. Then, based on this knowledge, they gradually developed various forms of magic through spells and gestures. Lothian and Galadriel have already learned most of what I taught them. If you want to learn more, you can communicate directly with them. If their knowledge isn't enough for you, you can come and ask me. I'm happy to share all my knowledge with you." "I see." Hearing Marianne's words, George's mind raced. quickly grasping the meaning in his own way. The Valor and the Magyar were gods derived from Iluvatar's ideas, each possessing different abilities. In his understanding, these gods must have mastered certain laws. Just as Manwa, the Valor King, mastered the laws related to wind, air, and all birds, Varda mastered the laws related to light, and Melkor mastered the laws related to darkness. The laws mastered by the Valor and the Magyar, when combined, represent the entire universe's laws. Ordinary elves and humans, unable to use these laws like gods or comprehend the knowledge they contain, can only imitate certain abilities through more complex methods. This is the magic of Middle-earth. Meryl's laws involve plants, so with a mere thought, countless vines sprout from the earth to entangle enemies. Grey elves cannot do this. Like Allison yesterday, he needs to use incantations combined with his internal magic to conjure a few vines from the ground to aid in battle. To put it more simply, a god who possesses the laws of force can control the falling of apples at will. He demonstrates this to a highly skilled human, who gleans various related mechanical formulas. This human can then use these formulas and principles to create machines that achieve similar effects. Other humans, even after witnessing the god's demonstration, cannot comprehend it, but fortunately, with the guidance of the highly skilled human, they can mechanically apply the formulas. Magic and those mechanical formulas are not fundamentally different. That incredibly powerful human, if placed in the magical world, would be the founder of all major magical spells. If placed among the elves of this world, he would be among the earliest elves to comprehend and use magic. Among them, the most powerful, like Lothian and Galadriel, learned all the knowledge taught by Miriam, though they couldn't fully digest it and didn't reach Miriam's level. The less powerful, like Allison, only grasped the basics. In fact, if viewed this way, magic in other worlds is roughly based on the same principle. The reason he can quickly understand and master any lightning magic now is because he touched upon the essence of lightning through Misaka Mikado. Having touched upon the essence of lightning, understanding the various forms of lightning magic and techniques derived from it becomes naturally simple and clear. However, he has only touched upon the essence of lightning. He is far from mastering it. If he had mastered the essence of lightning, he wouldn't just be at the sub-celestial level, his mere use of lightning would already be at the celestial level, capable of easily destroying a planet. If they mastered all the laws of the Valor and Magyar in Middle-earth, then he might have the ability to create a single universe, and his combat power would at least be at the peak of a single universe. It seems that Middle-earth still has a lot of potential to be tapped. Of course, he also considered another point. Different worlds should have some differences in their fundamental laws, but they should be roughly the same, and their essence would not be too far apart. Collecting the same type of magic from different worlds would most likely help him better understand the essence of that type of law, which was his unique advantage. Just like light, fairy tale has light magic, the Harry Potter world also has light magic, the card captor Sakura world also has it, and Varda in Middle-earth represents light. If one were to comprehend a certain law and become a god in a single world, it would be extremely difficult, but combining the same type of laws from different worlds and learning from each other would be much simpler. So, in the following days, George basically spent his time with Lothian and Galadriel. Lothian was easy to please. As long as he told her a few short stories, she would be very willing to share all her knowledge and show her her magic. Lothian's most powerful ability is her spellcasting, which she can blend into her singing, making it undetectable. Anyone who hears her sing is under her spell, even with their senses shut down. George has experienced this several times, even using his mental powers and spiritual strength to maintain his composure. He struggles to avoid being hypnotized. The only way to break free is to interrupt Lothian's singing, that is, to attack her physical form. Galadriel is more troublesome. The strong-willed elven princess enjoys sparring with him, only willing to exchange magic with him honestly after losing. However, while Galadriel's magic is not as powerful as Lothian's, it is very broad. It includes not only knowledge from Meryl, but also knowledge of Aurora from the Noldor and light knowledge from Varda among the Light Elves. The problem is that her knowledge is too diverse, and she hasn't fully digested it yet. Many aspects are still immature. If given time to fully digest and integrate it, her future strength will definitely be formidable. This is evident in the movies. The future Elven Queen Galadriel resisted the temptation of the ring and forcibly banished Sauron through her own power. While George was peacefully exchanging magic in the Grey Elf Kingdom, waiting for the Grey Elves to finish their business and return to Dorshunir, he was unaware that his act of erasing the dark forces of the Valley of Death using fairy law had alarmed Morgoth and Angband. Crisis was gradually approaching him. Chapter 349 The Unexpected Birth of the Ring. In the Angbin Mountains, 3 volcanoes, tens of thousands of meters high, stand like gates before the fortress, billowing smoke and poisonous fog. Behind the volcanoes, in the depths unknown to the earth, countless orcs of various types toil at the deepest part of the crypt. A magnificent palace stands in the darkness. The palace gates are 1,000 meters high, and a massive demon wolf lies at their entrance. This demon wolf is named Kaharless, a cub personally selected and raised by Morgoth from the demon wolf race, infused with his own dark power and the devouring spirit. It can stand guard at the palace gate without blinking, and can detect any enemy's disguise. It possesses terrifying power. Inside the palace, on the throne, the source of all darkness, the once most powerful Valar Morgoth, suddenly rises from his throne. Such powerful light. Could it be that the gods have left Valinor and attacked? Just now, he sensed a sudden burst of matter-level light power from the direction of the Valley of Death, which greatly alarmed him. He almost thought that the goddess of light, Varda, had descended upon Middle-earth. The goddess of light rarely leaves Valinor. If she does, it's almost certainly with her husband, Manwë. Manwë's arrival in Middle-earth has only one possibility: to lead the gods in a second campaign against him. Most of his power is being used to corrupt Middle-earth. Although he has now acquired the 3 Silmarils, he is no match for a united army of gods. No, Varda's power shouldn't be limited to this, and they wouldn't come at this time. Closing his eyes and sensing more carefully, a look of doubt appeared on his face. The Noldor elves, instigated by him, slaughtered the Sea Elves and left Valinor. Knowing the god's nature, he shouldn't care about the lives of the Noldor elves here. Furthermore, he has just launched a war and hasn't gained the upper hand. Even if the gods were to intervene, they wouldn't choose this moment. In truth, he is also racing against time with the gods. If he can wipe out all the elves, humans, and dwarves on the continent before the gods react, and use his power to corrupt the entire Middle-earth, then the continent will become one with him. He was the supreme god of this continent. Not only the gods, but even Iluvatar couldn't subdue him. But if he were to be defeated by the gods before then, his plan would fail. That's why he was so eager to launch a war, wanting to defeat all forces that resisted him as quickly as possible. Sorin, come here, I have something to ask you. With a thought, he had already sent a telepathic message to his general Sorin, who was recuperating on his island. Not long after, Sorin, disguised as a vampire, flew to the palace gate, then reverted to his true form and knelt at Morgoth's feet. My master, what are your orders? How is your injury healing? Morgoth looked down at Sorin. Sorin slightly raised his head and respectfully replied, Master, I have recovered most of my strength. I am ashamed that I lost to an elf and a human. Thinking of the human who could use all sorts of strange magic, Sorin's eyes were filled with killing intent. The Balrog, led by Ragnaros, successfully breached the formidable defenses of Mazroth, while his orc army was routed, and he himself was severely wounded. This was the greatest humiliation he had ever suffered. He had vowed in his heart that one day he would sever that human's head and feed it to the wolves on his island. You can't be blamed for this. No one would have imagined that such a powerful mage could exist among weak humans, Morgoth said, offering him words of comfort instead of blaming Sorin. Besides his strength, Morgoth's ability to entice so many men to serve him so devotedly was also due to his admirable personal charisma. In the great symphony of Anu, only Morgoth dared to openly sow discord and defy the will of the One. Rest assured, Master, I won't fail again, Sorin assured Morgoth. And the serious injury has given me some ideas. If I succeed, my strength will undoubtedly increase significantly. Tell me your ideas, and perhaps I can help you refine them, Morgoth said with interest. In terms of strength, Sorin and Balrog were the strongest among his subordinates. Balrog wielded ultimate fire, and in terms of destructive power alone, he far surpassed Sorin. However, Sorin was a learned man among the Maiar. Before being seduced by Morgoth, he had studied under several Valar, making him more well-rounded. I planned to forge a ring, infuse it with all my knowledge, and then absorb the corresponding power. Wearing it, I can unleash twice the power, Sorin explained his ideas. His master had once been the strongest Valar, even surpassing Manwë, and had learned almost all the knowledge of the Valar except for Varda. If Morgoth was willing to help, it would greatly shorten the time it would take to forge the ring. Sounds good, but there are many oversights. I'll help you complete the forging of this ring, Morgoth agreed with Sorin's idea. With a wave of his hand, a piece of the finest magical metal flew from outside the palace. Then, he opened his mouth, and magical fire enveloped the metal. Various magical runes poured into the metal as if they were free. Over time, the magical metal gradually transformed into a ring covered with various strange runes. Finally, Morgoth infused the ring with a surge of his own magic. Alright, this ring also contains my power. Wearing it will make you 3 times stronger than usual. Thank you, Master. Soren accepted the ring with both hands, his eyes filled with adoration for Morgoth. Seeing Soren put on the ring and his power surge, Morgoth immediately ordered, Soren, something has happened at the Valley of the Dead. Take your men and secretly infiltrate that area to investigate. I need to know who eliminated my power there. He wasn't so kind as to sacrifice his own power to help Soren create the ring. He was only doing this so that Soren could investigate the situation at the Valley of the Dead for him. He had created the ring, and with his power, he could see Soren's situation in real time. If it wasn't the gods descending, that would be fine. But if the gods were indeed descending to attack him, then sacrificing Soren would be worthwhile. He could escape beforehand and hide, making himself untraceable to the gods. Rest assured, Master, I will complete the mission. Soren, unaware of Morgoth's intentions, felt his power triple and happily withdrew, preparing to return to the island with his most capable men to head to the Valley of the Dead. Chapter 350 Soren's Attack. Lucian, my daughter, be careful out there. If you encounter any danger, return to Dorenia immediately. At the border of Dorias, Tinge and his wife, Marion, reluctantly bid farewell to their daughter, Lucian. 7 days had passed since George arrived in the Grey Elf Kingdom. After rigorous selection, the team heading to Dorsonian was finally chosen and ready to depart. Don't worry, my daughter doesn't like fighting, but she's quite strong. I promise you, I'll return every 3 to 5 years. Lucian hugged Tinge and Marion, then sat on the back of a stag, gesturing to Galadriel beside her. In the elven concept of time, 3 to 5 years is roughly equivalent to 3 to 5 days in humans. Galadriel, clad in elven armor, drew her longsword and, with great spirit, commanded the elite Grey Elf team of over 200 men, depart. Dorsonian Elven City, thus, the caravan, riding stags, began its journey towards what was originally the Valley of Death. Elf mounts are mostly stags, with a few choosing horses. Humans primarily ride horses, while dwarves, due to their height, rarely ride horses, mostly opting for pigs and goats. Orcs rarely ride anything, though a few elite orcs might possess direwolves. Direwolves are descendants of hyenas and wolves, roughly the size of horses, or even larger, and are extremely ferocious and formidable in combat. Actually, I have magic that can quickly take you to Dorsonian, without the need for days of slow travel. George buried a self-made portal key under an ancient tree on the outer edge of the ring. Seeing that Lucia's group was ready to depart, he spurred his horse and followed. The ring had a special isolation effect, rendering his apparition and the portal key unusable. However, once outside the ring, this would be no problem. Therefore, if Lucia and the others wished, he could easily pack all the Grey Elves and their belongings into a special box now, then instantly appart back to the elven city of Dorsonian. I think they'd rather walk this part of the journey themselves. Like me, it's their first time leaving Doriath and seeing the outside world for the first time. Lucia shook his head, smiling as he pointed to the Grey Elves in the group, their curiosity about the scenery beyond the forest palpable. The Grey Elf Kingdom was protected by the Ring of Beauty, which, while peaceful and stable, also confined all the Grey Elves. Most of them, like Lucia, had never left the Grey Elf Kingdom and had never seen the outside world, living their lives in the primeval forest, seeing only the sky and trees. So when they stepped out of the ring, they were incredibly excited, filled with curiosity about everything outside the forest. Alright, at our pace, it should only take us 5 days at most. George nodded, not insisting. For him, it didn't make much difference. Back in Dorsonian, he would still be exchanging magic with Lucia and Galadriel, so the journey itself wouldn't be much different. The journey wouldn't interfere with his magical research. It's a pity you purified the Valley of Death, otherwise the journey would have been much more enjoyable. Galadriel looked at the newly transformed Valley of Death ahead, her tone full of regret. If the Valley of Death were still like before, it would surely be teeming with dark creatures, and she could have properly exercised along the way. I think it's quite good as it is now. We're safe and sound all the way. And we can enjoy many different landscapes without worrying about danger. Lucia rode on her great stag, gently stroking the branches swaying in the wind above her head. The branches instantly turned green, sprouted new buds, and blossomed into beautiful flowers. George, is that the legendary Gorgonus Mountains? 2 days later, when the Grey Elf party arrived at the center of what was once Gorgonus, Lucia excitedly tugged at George's sleeve, pointing to a faintly visible mountain range ahead. It was the first time she had ever truly seen such a majestic mountain range. Yes, once we cross that mountain range, we'll reach Dorsonian, George nodded with a smile. Lucia's face showed a hint of surprise. Go over there? Should we go around it? She had heard Galadriel say that the Gorgorhus Mountains were also called the Mountains of Dread, inhabited by countless giant, highly venomous spiders, their webs covering the entire mountain range. Even Morgoth's orc army had to detour around these mountains, as had the elves. Detouring is too time-consuming, and I need to keep communication between Dorsonic and Doriath open for future exchanges. George's meaning was simple. He planned to take this opportunity to eliminate all the giant spiders in the Mountains of Dread. The ancestors of those giant spiders were Ugriant, an evil god in the form of a spider, who had used his webs to trap Morgoth, helping him evade the god's detection and infiltrate the two trees. After Morgoth severely damaged the two trees, Ugriant took the opportunity to drain their sap and drink from Varda's well, thus greatly increasing his power. Even when fleeing back to Middle-earth, they trapped Morgoth in their webs, intending to kill him and swallow 3 Silmarils, only to be driven away by Morgoth's army of Balrogs. Therefore, those giant spiders were incredibly powerful, and most elves were no match for them. But for George, it was nothing. These giant spiders, like their ancestors, feared fire, and he was extremely skilled at using fire, especially large-scale fire. Looks like this journey won't be so boring after all. Galadriel immediately agreed with George's plan. However, just as the group was traveling and chatting, George suddenly frowned. Quickly tell everyone to stop. Enemies. He sensed a familiar dark force rapidly approaching them. Galadriel and Lothian seemed to sense it too, and shouted simultaneously, stop. Form defensive formation. The Grey Elves, who seemed to be leisurely enjoying themselves, were initially stunned by the order, but quickly formed a defensive formation. However, perhaps due to the long period without war, their defensive formation was riddled with flaws, causing even George, who knew nothing about military tactics, to roll his eyes. Just then, a red cloud flew in from afar and landed in front of the group. It was Zorin, who, having received Morgoth's mission, had secretly flown over the Dread Mountains with his vampire royal guard and searched Death Valley for several days without finding any clues. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.